Good afternoon. I welcome you to a regular briefing at the Media Press Center of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. We have Russian foreign correspondents with us. We start with the schedule of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. On March 11th, the Russian Foreign Minister will hold talks with the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He will arrive in Moscow on a working visit. Recently, high-level face-to-face contacts with the OSCE leadership have been reduced, as you know, to brief conversations on the sidelines of a number of ministerial events, including the OSCE meeting. Therefore, the planned meeting will be devoted to discussing both current issues related to the Secretary General's mandate and the general state of affairs in the OSCE, which continues to be in the deepest existential crisis and institutional crisis, which does not allow it to play any significant role in ensuring security in the region. And the situation, in fact, will not change until Western countries stop using the Vienna platform in their interests and violate the principles of the organization, simply destroying it in this way. Russia has never refused to work together with mutual respect for the benefit of all OSCE participating states. At the same time, he spoke frankly about the problems that have become in full growth both within this organization and, strictly speaking, in the region of its jurisdiction. We look forward to a constructive, thorough exchange of views. We turn to the situation around Ukraine. Ukrainian militants do not stop terrorizing the civilian population and the civilian infrastructure of the Russian regions. On February 27th, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked a civilian car with the help of drones in the city of Gravorin, Belgorod region. They did not kill a civilian and wounded another civilian. In total, at least 6 more citizens have been injured in the region from regular shelling and drone strikes over the past days. On February 28th, in the Kherson region, in the village of Malaya Leptica, as a result of a Ukrainian drone strike on an ambulance, a woman and a child were killed. They were taken to the hospital for hospitalization. In the same village, another drone struck a paramedic obstetric station. This fragment of our briefing is addressed directly to the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Policy, Kylie Kallas, who, I do not know what she ate or how she felt, but dared to say that Russian civilians do not die at the hands of the Kyiv regime.
Что мирные граждане России не погибают от рук киевского режима.
She said this in Munich as part of the so-called Conference on Security Policy.
Конференции по вопросам политики безопасности.
We are at a briefing every week. The ambassador-at-large for crimes of the Kyiv regime, Mr. Miroshnik, literally talks about the crimes of the Kyiv regime on a daily basis. First of all, paying attention to crimes against civilians, against children, against women, against civilian peaceful infrastructure. To what degree of meanness, fall, insignificance it is necessary to reach. And this is being demonstrated to us now by many Euro-Atlantic EU representatives so as not to notice all this. But we really know something else, as through the American agency of the same alleged development assistance, money went for which, according to the wording of this structure, strategic silence was bought. But in response to this very strategic silence, we will speak strategically. In the same village, as I have already said, a drone struck a paramedic obstetric station. A civilian was wounded. 2 utility workers were shell-shocked as a result of shelling of the residential sector of the city of Alyoshka and the village of Rybak. 2 people were killed. In the DPI, as a result of regular shelling of Gorlovka since February 26th, 1 civilian was killed and 11 wounded, including a child born in 2016 year. In total, in February, The Apu opened fire on the city 537 times. This is for the shortest month of the year. With the use of coins, long-range heavy artillery installations were made. More than 80 people were injured of varying severity. 3 people were killed. On the 28th of February in Makyivka, a teenager born in 2010 year was injured when a petrol mine was blown up. As the enemy's fire was suppressed, Russian servicemen continued to examine the liberated settlement of the Russian riverine Kursk region. Several more bodies of local residents were found there, tortured to death by these Ukrainists. On the 2nd of March, the chairman of the Investigative Committee of Russia, Alexander Ivanovich Postrogin, reported that since February of the 22nd year, Ukrainian gangs have attacked the territory of 34 subjects of the Russian Federation. These are regions located outside the borders of a special military operation. The deadliest weapons are supplied to the Zelensky regime by Britain, Canada, Germany, and some other Western countries. As a result of the criminal actions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the border and rear areas of Russia, 652 civilians, including 23 children, were killed. 2,980 people were injured, including 169 children. There is no conscience, no mind, no soul, no heart. There is no humanity in those who do not know all this and pretend not to know. It is impossible not to know about it. We've been talking about this every day for several years. We provide all materials to international organizations, translate them into different languages of the world. Our ambassadors in international platforms talk about this regularly, but it is necessary to be responsible for all this. Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for their war crimes. Shalva Sashvili, a mercenary from Georgia, was sentenced to 13 years in prison. The UFO pilots Dmitry Shemansky and Alexander Morozev, who planned terrorist attacks in Russia in April of the 23rd, received 26 and 22 years in prison, respectively. Russian law enforcement agencies will continue to work to bring Ukrainians and foreign mercenaries to justice for war and other crimes. And now about those who sponsor it all. On the 2nd of March, the so-called European summit was held in London with the participation of the leaders of 14 countries: Britain, Germany, Denmark, Spain, Italy, Canada, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland. Don't be surprised that Canada was there, although the summit is European. Everything is mixed up in this very Euro-Atlantic house. Norway, Poland, Romania, Finland, France, Czech Republic, Sweden, as well as representatives of the European Commission. The head of the European Commission of the European Union was the Secretary General of NATO. The absence of regular Russophobes from the Baltic states caught my eye. Apparently, they called only those who are still able to fork out for the needs of this Sharomiznik with a bank. And the Baltic countries have not produced anything for many years and are not able to give anything. In order to somehow influence this situation. Although the gathering in London was planned in advance, ironically, after Zelensky's fiasco at a meeting at the White House, it apparently began to be seen for him as a comforting gathering of supporters of unconditional support for the Kyiv regime. As they say, now it is the support of the Kyiv regime to the last Ukrainian. But one of the key results of this gathering can be considered an agreement on maintaining the flow of military aid to the Kyiv regime, to the promised on the eve of the Zelensky loan of £5.5 billion to ensure the military needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. British Prime Minister Starmer announced the first package to be financed under the agreement on British credit support to Ukraine. The volume is £3.5 billion. Let me remind you, it was concluded in July of the 24th year, and it provides for the production of more than 5,000 Martlet multipurpose missiles for the air defense system by Thales UK. A certain Ukrainian manufacturer will be engaged in the manufacture of launchers and mobile command posts. The contract amount is 1/16 billion pounds sterling, with the possibility of an increase of 500 million. The participants of the so-called summit agreed on a number of principles that they are going to adhere to with respect to Ukraine. Along with the continuation of military supplies, they confirmed their intention to increase sanctions pressure on Russia. This is despite the fact that they are already crunching under the onslaught of their own sanctions and our countermeasures. To ensure the participation of the Kyiv regime in a peaceful deal, as it was said, to strengthen its defense potential after the end of the conflict in order to deter, again, as they formulated here, aggression in the future. However, the main task, to achieve the consolidation of supporters of the Zelensky regime, the organizers of this meeting, judging by the statement of Keir Starmer, could not be solved. There were no queues of those eager to join the ranks proposed by the coalition, who wanted to defend Ukraine and guarantee peace. It seemed that everyone was concerned not with saving the agonizing Kiev regime, but with preserving some kind of transatlantic solidarity, which constantly fails before, and now it has completely smoked. Now that's new. Remember, there were plans before. What's there? Zelensky's peace plans? Yes. Then there were plans for victory troubles. Now a certain Franco-British initiative, a Franco-British plan for Ukraine has been introduced or, I don't know, thrown in or scattered. On the 2nd of March, a certain plan was presented. Its essence boils down to creating, as it was said there, safe conditions for the deployment of European troops in Ukraine as a kind of peacekeeping contingent. All of this, of course, does not rely on anything. There are no legal grounds or legally fixed decisions. Nothing like that. Everything on the knee was immediately written, invented, launched somewhere to do this. It is supposed to declare a truce for a month, as it was said, during which hostilities in the air, at sea, and strikes on energy infrastructure cease. This time will be used for, as they formulated there again, achieving direct, quote, a more reliable truce through negotiations that can eventually lead to a peace agreement. The developers are going to submit a plan for the United States to enlist the support of the White House. Apparently, as always before, Russia will present all this in some kind of turnout order, ultimatum, or somehow. In other words, the past has not taught them anything. What let's analyze in front of us. In reality, we are dealing with a frank desire to achieve a respite at any cost for, as I have already said, the agonizing Kiev regime of the armed forces of Ukraine, and to prevent the collapse of the front. The terrorist regime, with the help of its allies in the West, uses this pause to strengthen its own military potential and subsequent attempts at revenge. This is obvious to everyone. In this scenario, the conflict will inevitably resume with renewed vigor. This is the formulation of these thoughts. It is not even subject to any camouflage anymore. Camouflage doesn't help anymore. Everyone understands perfectly well what is at stake. They were also greatly helped by Merkel and Holland, who said that they used the Minsk agreements and negotiations on their implementation for exactly the same purposes at the time, but in fact, they simply pumped up the Kiev regime with weapons. We will repeat once again what we have said repeatedly. Firm agreements on a final settlement are needed. Without all this, some respite, regrouping, this is all absolutely unacceptable, as it will lead to the opposite result. It is absolutely unacceptable to deploy units of non-armed forces in Ukraine like this, as it is being said now on every corner in the European Union, some European troops, foreign contingents under some kind of Euro flags, military bases, peacekeeping operations, coalitions of like-minded people are coming up with. What have we not heard? Our position was voiced by the country's leadership. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly said this. And of course, I would ask you, although we have seen and heard a lot. It was here yesterday that Macron spoke once again, so to speak. I think we will talk about this later today, but there is something that of course requires literally the courage to perceive. This is a statement by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She talked about the rearmament of Europe and called on the like-minded people gathered here in London at this very summit on March 2nd, as they call each other, to put "I'm sorry, I'll say" as she said. This is a direct quote in quotation marks. Ursula von der Leyen called on all her like-minded people, open quotes, to put Ukraine in a position of strength and turn it into a steel porcupine. Well, I say again, a lot of things have been seen and read, but still, apparently, the bottom is not broken, and you know how the steel porcupine sounds in German. Stahlschwein. You heard right. This is not a play on words, but this is a real translation. Yes, yes, literally, it means a spiked pig. I'm sorry, did we understand you correctly, Ursula von der Leyen? Do you want to turn the Kyiv regime into a studded pig? You know, it seems to me that the Kyiv regime has long turned into this very spiked pig, this very steel porcupine, and has long been in a position of strength. The problem is that very much they have rubbed their knees in this position. And if you look at this phrase more or less, well, making certain efforts on yourself, of course, but seriously. After all, she says that there is no independent role for Ukraine, except to be this very spiked pig, this steel porcupine. From the point of view of the West, no other role is provided for Ukraine. And the situation in which Ukraine will be located will be determined, again, from the point of view of Euro-Atlantic structures, not by Ukrainians, not by citizens of their country, not by representatives elected by the people of Ukraine. Again, European commissioners, representatives of the European Union on foreign policy, the leadership of NATO, representatives of other countries that are in no way connected with Ukraine, either historically or even geographically, or within the framework of any obligations within international structures. No. People like Ursula von der Leyen, because they were delegated such powers, should, from their point of view, determine the situation of Ukraine. I'm going to ask one question. It's absolutely rhetorical. And what about democracy? What is there with the very freedom of choice of the people, about which these same European commissioners, high representatives, officials from Brussels constantly harangued? It turns out that it is possible on the one hand to educate a dictator, as it was done in Ukraine, and then to dictate his will to this dictator from abroad. A unique situation, of course, although, on the other hand, it is repeated many times in the history of the West. And now about the forced mobilization in Ukraine. On February 27th, the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Budanov, in an interview with the news agency, blamed the actual failure of forced mobilization in Ukraine. Who do you think it is? Well, It's obvious to Russia, which, according to him, allegedly conducts a campaign to discredit this process among Ukrainians. Do I understand Budanov correctly, that Ukrainians really like their mobilization? It's just that quite by chance, they sometimes stumble upon some information materials from Russia and may change their mind abruptly and not mobilize. Do we understand this correctly, that the whole of Ukraine is literally applauding, voting for this most violent mobilization? They are lining up. They are trying to shoot each other, so to speak, a subpoena. He arranges pickets in front of these very authorized bodies of the shopping center in order to be invited to mobilize as soon as possible. Do we understand Budanov correctly? And only Russia dissuades them from the interest and usefulness of this process. But this is quite, it seems to me, some kind of, it's not even nonsense anymore. I don't even know what it is. But this is from impotence and helplessness. This is an absolutely dead-end situation, when at least what to say, just to absolve yourself of responsibility. In general, we would like to recommend Budanov to look more often at pages on social networks, the internet, which are full of numerous evidences of hunting by employees of Ukrainian territorial recruitment and social support centers, hunting their own citizens in order to make up for the increasing losses of the armed forces of Ukraine. Let me remind you that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation succeeds in this monthly regime. Every month, the Kyiv regime manages to recruit about from 28 to 33,000 people in Ukraine. At the same time, the losses significantly exceed the number of mobilized Ukrainians. In November of the 24th year, losses in Ukraine amounted to more than 60,000 people. In December of the 24th year, more than 48,000 people. In January of this year, more than 51,000 people, almost 52. In February, 38,000 deaths of recruits became more frequent. Where would you think? On the battlefield. But on the battlefield, there is just a meat grinder in Ukraine. They are thrown just right to certain death. No. Now cases of death of recruits in Ukraine, directly in the premises of the shopping center, have become more frequent. Recently, Ukrainian journalists have counted about 40 such incidents. They did not find any evidence of condemnation of the perpetrators of the lawlessness being created. Is Russia also to blame? No. No, Budanov, look in this mirror. This is your reflection. You see yourself and are terrified of yourself. We have nothing to do with it. In conditions of a chronic shortage of people, Zelensky's bloody regime is ready to put literally everyone under the gun. We have already talked about his intention to reduce the mobilization age to 18 years. A new trend has emerged. You won't believe it. The categories of persons with reservations from the army in Ukraine are being reviewed everywhere. Ukrainian journalists and artists came into view. The Ministry of Culture of Ukraine announced that from the 3rd of March, it stopped issuing them permission to travel abroad. What is the motivation? Simple. The occurrence of numerous cases when such persons do not return to Ukraine within the restored terms. Why don't they return to Ukraine? Let's all think together. Probably, there is some secret. The democracy of Ukraine does not raise a question for anyone. Its well-being, transparency of constitutional processes. Electoral cycles take place regularly. Everything is fine in Ukraine. Why doesn't anyone go back there? Yes, no one wants to die in this very meat grinder of Zelensky. For the rotten, corrupt Ukrainian Kyiv regime, criminal Nazi regime. The above facts and many others once again confirm the actual special military operations for the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, the elimination of threats emanating from its territories. All the goals set by the leadership of our country will definitely be achieved. And look, on February 28, the armed forces of Ukraine tried to strike the Russian compressor station of the Turkish Stream gas pipeline with the help of drones. What kind of station is this because of the gas pipeline? It ensures uninterrupted supplies of Russian gas to Eastern European countries, including Hungary. This action caused a fair indignation of the Hungarian authorities. They regarded such actions of the Kyiv regime as an encroachment on the sovereignty of the country. They, the Hungarians, the official Budapest, had the strength, courage, wisdom to say this. While in Berlin, the very one that now claims something and endlessly talks about issues of war and peace, universal security, did not have the strength to say that the undermining of the very Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipeline, which was primarily directed to the Germans by Russian resources, is a blow to their economy according to their safety, according to their energy.
Является ударом по их экономике, по их безопасности, по их энергетике.
So look at how steel is tempered, how character is formed, and how the history of the country and the people is written. The Hungarians pointed out by the European Commission to Ukraine's gross violation of the European Commission's guarantee not to strike at critical energy infrastructure facilities used to deliver energy to the countries of the European Union, and for our part, we have repeatedly drawn attention and continue to draw the attention of the world community to the irresponsible and deceitful duplicitous position of Brussels, which cover up the provocative and very dangerous actions of Zelensky, which threaten the energy security of the European Union. Well, among other things, I draw attention to this pathetic cowardice demonstrated by the EU capitals, which cannot even say a word about their own security, but they talk about security guarantees, well, in particular for Ukraine. Your energy arsenals are in danger. The very energy opportunities and flows that brought light, warmth, and well-being to the countries of the European Union. And not a word was said at any meeting of ministers, energy, foreign affairs, defense, or representatives of the special services of the European Union countries, or even more so at summits. Only individual countries are silent on this subject there, in Istana, are still able to stand up for themselves. The others are all done. Here's another look at the question of hypocrisy. On the 24th of February, as you know, the Russian consulate general in Marseille was attacked. An improvised explosive device was used, and only by a lucky chance, the staff and visitors of the consular institution were not injured, but one of the Molotov cocktails fell in the immediate vicinity of the playground. The recording made by the Consulate General's video surveillance system helped French law enforcement officers detain criminals and bring them to justice. The 27th of February very quickly. Just imagine, in just 3 days, and that's not bad. The local court handed down a sentence to 2 French citizens, which is not subject to appeal. And that's where the good news ends, as they say. They were charged with 8 months. You will probably think of the conclusion of some settlements, or something like that, a boyar fort of some kind. But no. This should also be taken stoically, because it's somehow different. But, to be honest, there are already not enough emotions. 8 months of house arrest, with a ban on approaching the general consulate building and owning weapons for 5 years. Well, you just have to stay at home for 8 months. Well, how not to go and look at the crime scene, where criminals usually pull, as we know from the classics. A powerful, yes, legal system. We usually do not comment on the decision of the judicial authorities of other sovereign states. By the way, unlike the same Frenchmen who constantly allow themselves attacks against the Russian justice system, everything they say is wrong in it. Everything they say is not in the Western manner, that's for sure. But in this case, to be honest, it is simply impossible not to express surprise and indignation, because it seems to me that this is an unprecedented court verdict. In other words, to people who went intentionally to commit a terrorist act using incendiary mixtures and committed it, it turns out, are subject only to house arrest for several months. But I want to ask a question. And if they sit quietly at home? Well, be quiet. That is, if they do not throw anything out of the windows, as if they will not set fire to the neighbors, they probably have a chance for early, so to speak, home release will appear? No. But it's just some kind of joke. And this is France, which has experienced terrorist acts more than once. I remember these marches through the streets of Paris led by the President of France, when the entire world community supported the French in their struggle, in their rejection of terrorist acts. Presidents, foreign ministers, including Russian representatives, walked along these streets in support of France, in its quest to prevent terrorism. And this is the very terrorism that, after all, turns out to exist on the territory of France. And how can it not exist if now French citizens will know that they can get only a couple of months of house arrest for a terrorist act? The French Themis, apparently, chose to turn a blind eye to the true intentions of the terrorists, who, as it turned out, were under the strong influence of just this very pro-Ukrainian propaganda, in the context of a large-scale anti-Russian campaign launched in France precisely at the instigation of the authorities. We consider such demonstrative connivance against persons who have jeopardized the safety of people, Russian diplomats, and the consulate general as such, as an encouragement to commit new similar illegal actions. And do not think that we are afraid that there will only be such attempts against the Russian consulate general or Russian foreign institutions, Russian diplomats exclusively. They will be repeated in relation to others, because those who stand at a crossroads and think what choice to make for themselves, peaceful life, legitimate protests, or the use of illegal, extremist methods of implementing their own attitudes in such cases, seeing such an attitude as justice, complete connivance, of course, will make a choice in favor of extremism. They will absolutely not care who they use it against. They see the absolute ease of perception of the French law enforcement system of such crimes, and will draw the appropriate conclusions from this. Permissiveness is generated not only by impunity, but also by punishment disproportionate to the severity of the crime committed. We once again call on the French authorities to take comprehensive measures to ensure the safety of Russian foreign institutions and employees of family members. There were many questions about the situation around the Estonian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. Official Tallinn continues to increase pressure on the country's largest denomination, the Estonian Orthodox Church. On February 19th, the first reading of the amendments to the national law on churches and parishes, developed by the Estonian Ministry of Internal Affairs, took place in the country's parliament, the goals of which, as you know, and we have repeatedly talked about it, and stressed, by the way, this is also in the Estonian government itself. It is impossible to make the functioning of the Estonian Orthodox Church in its current form. According to these innovations, the activity of the Church cannot be associated with a person or organization having direct, quote, significant influence in a foreign state if it, the state, poses a threat to the security of Estonia, supports military aggression, acts contrary to the generally accepted principles of international law. I understand that in principle, then all American companies should leave Estonia, given that the United States of America has repeatedly violated international law, and now in many ways even admit it. Apparently, the Estonian authorities decided to fix the irreversible verdict on the deprivation of the residence permit of Metropolitan Yevgeny of Tallinn and all Estonia, who was expelled from the country in February of the 24th year. The draft law contains the wording that a direct quote to the clergy and members of the board of a religious association cannot be a person who has been refused to issue or extend the validity of a visa or residence permit, or they have been cancelled for the specified reason for 10 years. End quote. That is, the adjustment of the laws to, so to speak, specific plots is obvious. This is all politicization of the legal sphere. The consequences that the Estonian Orthodox Church will face in case of disobedience were previously directly stated by the main conductor of the discriminatory policy towards canonical orthodoxy in Estonia. The head of the Interior Ministry of this country, Lavrov, is a German. Estonia, this is a direct quote, will not enter into a dialogue with the Church, but will file a lawsuit to impose a ban on its activities. End quote. It seems that they sought to secede from the Soviet Union under the pretexts including freedom of worldview and religion. And now it's as if they are trying to find those very unsightly pages of their existence within the Union in order to reincarnate them. The legislative innovations of official Tallinn violate not only the constitution of this country. This is, for example, Article 40, I quote, "Everyone has freedom of conscience, religion, and speech," end quote, of the Estonian constitution. And there are a number of international legal obligations that Estonia has voluntarily, not forcibly, at various times, not as it used to be, as they believe, but voluntarily assumed. Here, for example, is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of December 16, 1996 year. It was already a free Estonia, wasn't it? Or the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination of the 21st of December of the 65th year. Now Estonia has joined this. Or, for example, the European Convention on Human Rights on the 4th of November of the 50th year, the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities of the 1st of February 95th, the Charter of the European Union on Fundamental Rights of the 12th of December 2007 year, the Treaties on the European Union of the 7th of February 92nd year. The list goes on, and Estonia joined all of this, being a sovereign, independent, and, as they say, a free state. These fundamental documents deal in particular with the need to respect freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and to prevent discrimination based on confessional grounds and persecution based on religious beliefs. Well, everything is exactly what the Estonian government is now violating, and doing exactly the opposite. But in the OSCE documents, in particular, recommendations on the analysis of the legislation of religion and belief of the 2004 year, it is said that laws concerning national security and terrorism on religious grounds should not be applied against religious organizations that are not engaged in explicit criminal or violent activities. And state security should not be a pretext for restricting legitimate religious activities. In addition, it is fixed. This is a guide on OSCE policy issues, which is called Freedom of Religion and Belief and Security. So it says that the dialogue between the state and the religious community should be based on the principles of strengthening freedom of religion and respect for religious communities. I have one question. Estonia has voluntarily taken all of this upon itself, subscribed to everything, and propagandizes all of this in one way or another at home within society. I have one question. Or maybe Estonia just isn't an OSCE member anymore. But no. I regularly see representatives of Estonia on the OSCE platform at OSCE ministerial meetings. They sit there, they have their own flag, they have their own card at the table, they broadcast something like that there. So if you think that you have the right to sit at the OSCE table, maybe you remind yourself that, in addition to your rights, you have obligations to fulfill everything that you signed up for within the OSCE. We have to state that the Estonian authorities are so disgusted by the dialogue with representatives of their own, not some alien, but their own Estonian civil society, of which the Estonian Orthodox Church is an integral part, that they are ready to act in the worst traditions of, as they call it, totalitarian regimes, ignoring any norms of both law and morality. Once again, we would like to draw your attention, to draw the attention of everyone and the entire world community to the illegal discriminatory actions of the Estonian authorities. And, of course, we will continue to demand from official Tallinn respect for human rights in the field of freedom of religion, an end to the persecution of canonical orthodoxy in Estonia. Conscience, especially freedom of conscience, is no longer necessary to talk about here. Let's move on. Another topic. Just 1 second now. These are public actions in Berlin that have now taken place. And they were held not just as anti-Russian. They were held with the participation of terrorist organizations. Let's take a closer look at this. On the 1st of March, an anti-Russian street provocation was held in the center of Berlin with the sanction of the German authorities, and not an action. It was organized by a group of political activists, natives of Russia, supervised by European special services. By the way, 2 of the 3 initiators of this propaganda event are officially recognized in our country as foreign agents. They were among the persons requested by the state authorities as part of the prisoner exchange. Let me remind you that this exchange took place on the 1st of August of the 24th year. Yashin Kara-Murza. The German side is trying to continue using this operational resource of its own in destructive actions against our country, while Berlin only increases the degree of hostility. The neo-Nazi terrorist organization Russian Volunteer Corps, banned in our country, was involved in the implementation of the mentioned action, which took place on one of its segments in the immediate vicinity of the complex of buildings of the Russian embassy in Germany. Let me remind you that in the period from the 23rd to the 24th years, with the complicity of the Kyiv regime and Western military advisors, it carried out an attack on civilians in the Bryansk, Belgorod, Kursk regions. On the 1st of March in Berlin, members of the RUK, among other things, openly distributed recruitment leaflets among Russian relocators. They were decorated with clear references to the symbols and ideology of Nazism. The German police did not interfere with this at all, and they did not prevent it. Not because they did not understand what was happening, but very much even understanding this matter consciously. At the same time, I am speaking to a person who grew up in Germany, but at the same time does not have German citizenship, officially, and has long been banned from entering, you won't believe it, in Germany. In other words, the local authorities have no doubts about the criminal nature of his political aspirations and actions, and his work, as they say, lives and continues, and the German authorities do not pay attention to this. The Russian embassy in Germany has twice appealed to the German Foreign Ministry with calls not to authorize this provocative action. Both times, the relevant notes verbales of the Russian diplomatic mission were completely ignored. All this once again convinces that the German authorities purposefully contributed to the holding of such a Sabbath, and it is obvious that one of the goals of the event was the public legitimization of the tourism organization in Germany. By interacting with her, Berlin is playing with fire, and this fire can easily spread to Germany. We strongly recommend that the German side assess the risks associated with supporting such structures. Germany's experience was more than sad. There were also questions about the situation on the Korean Peninsula. We are anxiously following the evolution of the situation. Unfortunately, there is a tendency to increase tensions due to the ongoing joint military maneuvers of the United States and the Republic of Korea. A new round of escalation can provoke real large-scale South Korean-American exercises, which are called Freedom Shield. Only today, it was reported that during these maneuvers, a fighter of the South Korean Air Force, as it was said, mistakenly dropped 8 bombs on a residential area in the city of Pyeongchang. Do I understand correctly? Is it South Korean? A South Korean locality. According to reports, about 7 people were injured, Several buildings were destroyed. You know, of course, we express our condolences to all the victims. But I would like to remind you once again that the rattle is not a weapon that does not lead to good, especially when, well, there is definitely a peaceful way of settlement. The Russian side has repeatedly stressed that military exercises in the region only unleash a dangerous spiral of confrontation, fraught with a large-scale conflict on the peninsula, including with the use of nuclear weapons. And we still hope that the public statements of President Trump to the chairman of the State Affairs of the DPRK, Kim Jong-un, will be translated into practical steps that will make a constructive contribution to strengthening stability and establishing lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and the Northeast Asia region. And of course, we believe that in these very conditions, in which the current escalation is taking place, we consider Pyongyang's measures aimed at strengthening its own defense capability, countering external threats to the country's security, and protecting its sovereignty to be quite justified. The Middle East. On the 4th of March, an emergency session of the League of Arab States in Cairo approved a gas reconstruction plan. The key element of the initiative is that the implementation will be carried out while maintaining the Palestinian population in the sector. The roadmap provides urgent assistance to more than 2 million residents of Gaza. First of all, the construction of new housing, the rehabilitation and development of infrastructure, and the strengthening of the economic potential of this Palestinian territory. It is important that the Arab countries have reached a consensus on the parameters of the post-crisis revival of gas. Real prospects are opening up not only to improve the humanitarian situation, but also to launch international cooperation, to turn the sector, hopefully, into a territory of peace and stability. Today, the main thing is, of course, to ensure a sustainable ceasefire and the safety of the civilian population. The task of rescuing the hostages held in Gaza requires an urgent solution. We call on all parties, both Palestinians, Israelis, and external players, to rally around the Arab plan and work in concert in the interests of its implementation. Such important events as the ministerial meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Jeddah on March 7th and the Conference on Gas Reconstruction, which is scheduled to be held in Egypt in the near future, will contribute to achieving this goal. Moscow believes that the consolidation of international efforts to improve the humanitarian and economic recovery of the sector will create the prerequisites for activating the political track of the settlement. Only the restart of the Palestinian-Israeli peace process to resolve the complex of final status issues will make it possible to end the cycle of confrontation, which does not cause serious damage to the Palestinian and Israeli people. The Russian opposition remains consistent, unchanged. A political solution must be reached in accordance with international legal decisions and provides for the creation of two states, Palestine on the border of 1967th year with the capital East Jerusalem of Israel, coexisting in peace and security. The task of promptly resuming multilateral cooperation in the sphere of crisis settlement, including between the Palestinians and Israelis, is also on the agenda. Such interaction should be based on the consolidated positions of external players. Its framework could be a Middle East quartet of international mediators consisting of Russia, the United States, the EU, the UN, with the involvement, as Russian diplomacy has been offering for many years, of key Arab states. When developing approaches to overcoming challenges in the Middle East, the position of the countries of the region should be decisive. We confirm our readiness for close cooperation with both Middle Eastern partners, Arab countries, Palestine, Israel, and international participants in the B process. And Romania, what is happening there, of course, is incredible. Bucharest nervously took the message published on the 4th of March at the Bureau of Internal Affairs of Russia, in which, on the example of the scandalous presidential election campaign in Romania, the futile attempts of globalists, European bureaucrats, to suppress the growing demand for the protection of national interests in many EU states were exposed. Absolutely painful reaction of Bucharest. There, the Bucharest establishment burst into a flurry of accusations against our country for some reason, in allegedly carrying out hybrid actions aimed at, as it was formulated, undermining Romanian democracy. For God's sake, it is impossible to imagine more than Romanian democracy is being undermined by the Romanian political elite itself. We were also accused of seeking to influence the course and outcome of the electoral process. This is how interesting. Is it that we are withdrawing from the run of candidates for, so to speak, the highest post in Romania? Are we canceling the election results in Romania? No, of course not. They do everything themselves. What does it have to do with us? Statements about certain plans of Moscow to undermine the democratic foundations of Romania. Well, listen, this does not stand up to any criticism at all. The local elites are successfully coping with this task without us, on their own. Moreover, they do not disdain anything at all for the sake of preserving their own power. For those who follow what is happening in this country still link in memory the events of last year's election campaign, which ended, as I have already said, with the annulment of the elections on the eve of the second round. The whole world could not believe their eyes. How is that so? This is a country that professes democracy, takes and simply cancels the election results before the second round. Haven't we seen it? And wasn't it the West itself that showed the whole world how democratic processes can be manipulated in the same situation in Ukraine, when there really wasn't a second round cancelled? There was just a third round appointed. That's it. Everyone understood. It's possible. Why was the second round in Romania cancelled? Yes, because it became clear that the winner is not the one that needs a candidate, but another one. Now, as for Bucharest's obsession with finding a Russian trace in these internal Romanian, internal political showdowns, is this something new too? Is this a new invention, a novel? No, we have repeatedly rejected all these groundless speculations and once again clearly state that Russia does not have a habit of interfering in other people's affairs, and it is not necessary to shift from a sick head to a healthy one. These are Romania's problems. What is happening there? This is a crisis of the political system. What is happening there? This is an absolute substitution of democratic institutions and institutions with unscrupulous manipulations. We have nothing to do with it. Instead of objectively looking at the situation and drawing the right conclusions based on your own analysis, the ruling circles of Romania persistently continue to follow this Russophobic course, escalation, and once again this is evidenced by the publicly announced on March 5 baseless decision of the Romanian authorities to declare the military attaché of the Russian embassy in Bucharest his assistant undesirable persons on the territory of the country. As you well understand, this unfriendly step will not remain without our response. Who have they done worse to? Obviously, to myself. Now, the Russian non-governmental organization Information Group on Crimes Against the Person, or, in cooperation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the support of Mitras, is organizing such an announcement on the 7th of March on the sidelines of the 58th session on human rights. Sessions of the UN-Human Rights Council video conference events on the crisis of freedom of speech, persecution of journalists and public activists in Europe. I emphasize once again, the 7th of March is 1300. The event will take place in Geneva on the 24th. In Geneva, where a session of the UN-Human Rights Council is being held from February 24th to April 4th, 1300, as I said, Moscow time. During the discussion with the participation of well-known journalists, public figures, publicists from a number of countries, including those who have personally faced neoliberal censorship and harassment from the so-called collective West, it is planned to exchange views, assess the situation with freedom of speech, ensuring the independent work of the media and the safety of journalists in certain European countries. We were also invited to support this event. I invite you accordingly. Who is interested, who is not indifferent to this problem, join this event. The link to the connection will be available in the text version of the briefing, and just the information about the last event In the period from the 21st to the 25th of February, a festival fair made in Russia was held in Abu Dhabi with great success. It was organized by the Russian Export Center, with the active assistance of the embassy of our country in the United Arab Emirates. The opening ceremony was attended by high-ranking representatives of the United Arab Emirates, held for the first time on Emirati soil. Such a large-scale event of this kind made it possible to acquaint a large local audience with a wide range of goods, which were presented by 80 enterprises from 30 regions of our country, Russia. The exchange of business contacts was in great demand, during which direct communication between representatives of Russian and Emirati business circles was organized. As part of the cultural program and event, performances of our creative teams, a demonstration of an exhibition of digital artists took place, and for fans of the gaming industry, a virtual reality zone worked. The Scientific and Educational Forum Talent Summit was held there in Abu Dhabi on February 23-25, which was attended by high-ranking officials of Russia, the United Arab Emirates, specialists of the Syria's federal territory, demonstrated a variety of opportunities, methods for identifying and harmonious development of young talents. The long-term objective of the forum was to work out the issues of establishing a permanent platform for the exchange of experience and ideas between Syria's and Emirati structures in education, science, innovation, and culture. The festival and forum, which provoked a lively positive public response, became a vivid illustration of the traditionally friendly nature of our bilateral relations, and gave an additional impetus to the further development of trade, economic, cultural, and humanitarian fields. And one more announcement. The 6th of March marks the 55th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and Botswana. In connection with this event, congratulatory messages were exchanged at the level of the foreign ministers of the two countries. For more than half a century, relations of friendship and mutual respect have developed and are developing between our states. Constructive foreign policy cooperation is maintained at the UN and other international platforms. A certain experience of mutually beneficial partnership in the trade and economic sphere has been accumulated. A solid contractual and legal framework has been formed. One of the important areas of cooperation is the training of qualified Botswana personnel. Hundreds of specialists have been trained in Russia in various highly demanded areas, such as medicine, mining, telecommunications. They apply the knowledge gained in our country, successfully working in various sectors of the national economy, and we hope that the multifaceted cooperation between Moscow and Gaborone will continue successfully in the future. We congratulate our Botswana partners on this significant anniversary. We wish the people of Botswana well-being, prosperity, and every success. And, well, as without the upcoming holiday of the upcoming and very beloved 8th of March by all of us. I don't know what and how they planned then. Well, you can say the founding mothers of this holiday, but in our country, it seems to me, it has been given a completely unique sound. These are women's rights, and their really special role in the life of our country, society, and people, which is always emphasized not with the same respect by men. In my opinion, we have formed an absolutely harmonious holiday. And you know, there were a lot of questions. Why do I focus on this topic? Because there were a lot of questions. But did we have historical female diplomats? Now, it seems to me, such questions do not arise. We will come back to this later. I will provide you with statistics. But yes, for a really long time in our country, diplomacy was considered a purely male sphere of activity. But in fact, this is not quite true. From the first years of the creation of the People's Commissariat of Foreign Affairs, the interests of our motherland were defended on an equal basis with men by outstanding female diplomats, who headed domestic representative offices abroad. The first in this row, of course, is Alexandra Mikhailovna Kollontai, a statesman, a politician, the first female ambassador of the Soviet Union. Remember, since 1923, she has been in diplomatic work. Since the 30s, she has worked as a trade representative in Norway and Mexico. It contributed to the establishment of the development of economic relations of the Soviet Union with these countries. In the period from the 30th to the 45th years, she was an envoy to Sweden, at the same time a member of the Soviet delegation to the 16th-18th sessions of the League of Nations, took active steps to neutralize the influence of Hitler's Germany on the Scandinavian peninsula, promoted the conclusion of the Moscow Peace Treaty with Finland in 1940th year, and in the 44th year participated in negotiations on withdrawal Helsinki from World War II. But but there were other successful female diplomats who represented our country in the international arena after the war. These are the permanent representatives of the USSR to the UN Office and other international organizations in Geneva. With the rank of ambassador, Zoya Vasilyevna Mironova, she successfully worked in this post for almost 2 decades, from 1966 to 1982, ambassador of the USSR of Russia to Switzerland, Zoya Grigorievna Novozolova from 1987 to 1992 year, and, of course, women who have always worked in the media, and well-known translators, and employees of the archival direction, country experts. And in modern Russia, the importance and role of women in diplomatic activity is steadily growing. In recent years, almost half of those entering the ministry are girls. Women head 4 departments in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These are Nadezhda Mikhailovna Baranova, the Historical and Documentary Department, Lyudmila Georgievna Vorobyova, the 3rd Department of Asia, the Department of Partnership with Africa, and Tatiana Evgenievna Dovgalenko. DEEP is also headed by women. Women ambassadors of our country, the Russian Federation, serve as an example of successful professional diplomatic activity of women. Valentina Ivanovna Matvienko, Russian ambassador to Malta from 1991 to 1994, in Greece from 1997 to 1998. Olga Yakovlevna Ivanova is the ambassador of Russia to Mauritius from 2004 to 2011. Lyudmila Georgievna Vorobyova is the ambassador of Russia to Malaysia from 2010 to 2015. Indonesia. Pepuenova Guinea concurrently from 2018 to 2024. Eleonora Valentinovna Mitrofanova, Russian ambassador to Bulgaria since the 21st year. Before that, the UNESCO direction worked, cooperation grew. Well, our ranks were joined by Rada Tatlana Zainalova, the Russian ambassador to Mauritius since the 24th year. Here's answering your many questions. And now I'm ready to continue. Please, let's start with the question of international life.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Well, first of all, of course, Happy New Year. Health, goodness, and spring.
Thank you.
But, unfortunately, the question is about a not very pleasant lady. How would you comment on the statement by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and a number of other European politicians on the continuation of further support for Ukraine by rearming Europe, against the background of the US announced cessation of arms supplies to the Kyiv regime?
As you know, the confrontational course of the European Union towards Russia remains unchanged. Russophobia is still the main reason for existence. As we see, the main driving force of the current, in fact, well, it seems to me, the lost generation of self-appointed elites who have long ceased to associate themselves with the interests of their people, their peoples, ordinary Europeans. We have been seeing this trend for many years now, without the slightest hesitation. They are ready to bring the well-being of their own citizens. The principles, by the way, are about that very democracy, that very free electoral process. Everything goes into the furnace, and freedom of speech, and the safety of journalists, if only to preserve, well, for example, I do not know, myself in power, or to push through the world order based on their rules. On the right of the strong, everything is forgotten, everything is trampled. And here we see, on the one hand, the changing rhetoric towards realism on the part of Washington. And the main thing is that it really seems to me that many people even around the world were somehow encouraged by this desire of Washington to voice messages for peace, for political and diplomatic ways of regulating the conflict. That's how it would be possible to develop this topic. For those who have traditionally spoken in the European Union or Europe about, I don't know, in the world of legality, democracy, freedom, and so on and so on. But no, it seems that these words only somehow annoyed them, or literally, you know, awakened some of the basest feelings in them.
Раздосадовали, что ли, или буквально, знаете, пробудили в них какие-то самые низменные, что ли, чувства.
They don't need any peace, as it turned out. By the way, as we have now realized, they do not need a peaceful Ukraine at all. They don't think about her at all. And so Mrs. von der Leyen just the other day directly outlined what kind of future she has in store for this country. So today I said the role, as it was written there, of a steel porcupine, yes, or some kind of pig that she should have. A spiked pig should be, so to speak. And not Ukraine, or Ukraine should, from the point of view of the Lean Foundation, turn into a spiked pig. Well, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad. Hence, everything is still happening against the background of the devastated European arsenals and Washington's statements about the revision of American assistance to the Kyiv regime. Hence the attempts of the EU leadership, a number of member states, to proclaim a new long-term course of development of the EU, the course of rearmament and forced militarization of this once peaceful European project, and in the absence of its own financial resources, so stupidly squandered on multi-billion-dollar corruption schemes, for the purchase of absolutely untested anti-cancer vaccines, as you remember, to overcome the consequences of the self-imposed anti-Russian sanctions imposed by Brussels under the dictation of Washington, in the dependence of the EU industry on fabulously expensive, and, by the way, there is also unstable American oil. This means a course towards uncontrolled borrowing of funds for military needs, guaranteeing the present debt enslavement of future generations of EU citizens, to the detriment of the vital interests of socio-economic and humanitarian development. This means the collapse of all those plans that were announced and announced. We are witnessing today the throwing and efforts of the EU leadership to unconditionally torpedo, not even peaceful initiatives, but only the prerequisites for them. Only the words are more than indicative. Such, you know, a terrible grin, which we see here and which, apparently, they used to hide behind smiles or with worried faces. And now just these fangs have come out. All this must be taken into account in order to understand the true motives and intentions of the so-called collective Brussels, which has finally discredited itself. And these are not the Munich conferences on security policy, or any of their constructive, or at least some kind of activity, on the platform of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It seems to me that they distorted the word security, raped it. Now, instead of security, it's just danger.
Thank you very much. One more question. The other day, the Academy Awards ceremony was held. And in particular, the film by J.C. Eisenberg, The Real Bode, won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. But this movie, which millions have already watched, and even more people will watch, contains obvious distortions of the historical truth. Here's how you could comment on the general situation with the distortion of historical truth in the filmography, and how do we deal with it?
You know, there are different ways to deal with the distortion of historical truth, knowledge of one's own history in the first place, the creation of information products of historical truth, taking into account new technologies. I mean films, audiovisual content, works that would inform and relay historical facts to different audiences in an accessible form.
В доступной форме на разные аудитории доносили и ретранслировали исторические факты.
It is also necessary to fight by, of course, disavowing, namely, revealing the untruth, which is endlessly pushed to us under the guise of truth. What you have said, I have seen messages on this subject. I didn't believe it. We double-checked, and it turned out that even such a historical fact as the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 year, about which it is written, said, taking into account the huge number of arrays of documents, documentary texts, eyewitness accounts. There is already so much information that it would be impossible to come up with anything and look for it. But it turns out, as they say, you can teach a hare to play the drum, which they apparently did. I'm just for those who forgot. Let me remind you, the salvation of the surviving Polish Jews, firm persecution by the Nazis, anti-Semitic formations of the People's Armed Forces, came only from the Red Army. This is a historical fact. And we talk about this regularly, and now we are answering your question, not in order, to somehow once again give evidence of this fake consciousness that is raging in the West now. That's not the point, and that's not what we want. We want our audience to understand how for decades we have defended, really defended from, and they beat off the memory of our heroes. And we want to show, in practice, among other things, what technologies exist to, among other things, protect the younger generation, to attract their attention, to attract the attention of those who teach them history and other subjects, who form the information and cultural agenda in our country, what brainwashing techniques exist. Here's a concrete story for you, please. I think that we will definitely talk about this in a little more detail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. With us, Lee. So is Ria Novosti with us.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We are with you? First of all, let me join the congratulations that have already been voiced on the upcoming 8th of March. So we also have such rather complicated questions. There are two of them. The first question is about what you have already voiced about Emmanuel Macron's statement. How would you comment on his statement yesterday, which actually contains a threat to Russia, including nuclear weapons?
We will definitely analyze this statement of Macron's yesterday step by step. A special material will be published on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's just getting ready now. We can say that what came out of Macron's mouth yesterday is a set of false theses. I don't even know if there are words of truth there. He talked about ensuring Ukraine's security guarantees. He did not say a word that a peaceful settlement is possible without taking into account the legitimate security interests of both Russia and the whole of Europe without any divisions. He did not say a word about the principles on which the European community relied, so to speak, repeating the thesis of the indivisibility of security. And it seems to have been made with a claim to a certain conceptuality yesterday, this statement. As for Ukraine, but still Macron cannot fail to understand that the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis lie in the purposeful long-term disregard with the west of Russia's interests, and accordingly regional interests, the interests of Europe to Eurasia, attempts to undermine the defense potential of our country. It is simply to use Ukraine as a springboard for inflicting on us, as they themselves have formulated, many times said, a strategic defeat. On the one hand, Macron tried to accuse Russia of aggression, but on the other hand, for some reason, he forgot that it is from the lips of Western politicians that we have been hearing for infinitely many years a statement that they will either restrain us or, according to them, inflict some kind of strategic defeat on us. After all, we have repeatedly said, and I will remind you again, this landmark speech of the President of the Russian Federation, 2007 year at the Munich conference, where it was literally said step by step, with facts in hand, that the threat is obvious, there is a pan-European security, that it is impossible to flirt with these games. We talked about our concerns, we talked about our interests, we warned that the course of unrestrained expansion of NATO, the approach to the military infrastructure, NATO infrastructure to our Russian borders, contrary to the assurances that have been repeatedly surrendered, that this will not happen, that all this is unacceptable for our country, that it contradicts the fundamental principles of indivisibility of security, which, once again, I repeat, the Europeans themselves have endlessly reconfirmed. Macron could not have been unaware of the origins of the Ukrainian or the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis, in particular because it was France, his predecessors but representing France, who were the very guarantors of the Minsk package of agreements, which was supposed to be a way out, a political and diplomatic way to a settlement. The categorical statement about the violation of the Minsk agreements by Russia, which was voiced again by Macron, does not stand up to any criticism at all. How so? After all, it was his predecessor, President Talleyrand, President of France François Talleyrand, who said that he did not intend and was not going to implement them, because in this way they simply dragged their time and supplied Ukraine with weapons and prepared it for, well, further aggressive actions and so on. Angela Merkel said the same thing. Did Macron, President Macron and his entourage not see this? After all, they did not talk about it on the sidelines. These are not indirect quotes. These are their direct appeals to the public. Through the media, they are there. You can listen to them, reread them, watch them, and so on. Well, of course, there are some spot plots in the form of accusing Russia of allegedly manipulating the situation in Romania, in Moldova, but it just doesn't hold up at all. Not that critics. It's just absurd. This is absurd. What does Russia have to do with it? Could it be that in Moldova, Russia rewrote the Moldovan language into Romanian, so to speak? The leadership in Chisinau may have Russian passports. No, of course not. In Moldova, everything is rewritten in the Romanian way. Management in Moldova with Romanian passports. They now call Moldovans Romanians. In Romania itself, elections are being cancelled without any influence of Russia, but simply because the elections were held wrongly, not because the elections were held wrongly, but according to the laws of Romania itself. The elections simply gave the wrong result, and just the second round, as we said today, was cancelled. There are a lot of such passages in Macron's statement that are false, incorrect, contradictory. I want to say again, pay attention to the fact that already today Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has repeatedly commented on this, even today, during a press conference on the results of the negotiations. And there will also be, so to speak, a step-by-step analysis of the relevant theses of Macron presented. I think that in the near future today we will publish.
Thank you very much. We have a second question. It concerns one of the topics that you also voiced. This is Moldova. On February 27th, the head of the Ministry of Health of the Republic of Moldova said that if the Soviet soldier had not liberated Moldova, then its inhabitants, according to the quote, would be much happier today. How would you comment on this?
What? Again, maybe.
We would be much happier today.
If the Soviet soldiers had not liberated Moldova, as you said, then
Moldovans would be much happier today.
You know, this is a monstrous statement, very scary. Because if the Soviet soldiers had not liberated Moldova, and the Soviet soldiers consisted, among other things, of Moldovans, not only Moldovans by nationality, but Moldovans are also people living in Moldova. Although then it wasn't shared at all, a common homeland, a common country. No one has ever segregated each other by nationality. If the Soviet soldier had not liberated Moldova, Moldova would not have existed. And there would be no Moldovans. Right now, we see how the current authorities in Chisinau are literally destroying their own cultural identity. They are doing what the Soviet soldiers did not allow them to do then. Soviet soldiers defended Moldova in its ethnocultural identity. And the current Chisinau authorities are destroying the ethnocultural identity of Moldova, rewriting Moldovans into Romanians, Moldovan into Romanian, and smoothly, and sometimes simply rudely destroying the country itself in principle. This is what the economic indicators say. Yes, this, strictly speaking, is the geopolitical, geostrategic plan of the current Chisinau. Now, as to whether those who would be happy, and not today, would be, I can't even do it. You see, it's impossible to even repeat it. You know, there is some very terrible logic, but it can still be traced. I'll explain what's going on. You know, those who are from the generation that fought for Moldova with the Nazis, who rebuilt Moldova, who survived the evacuation, who worked in the rear, those who have not lived up to today's times, you know, I think every time, what would they say if they saw all this? So that's why this lawlessness is happening in Moldova. Because there is no one to defend from that generation. Maybe it was hinted at by who is the head of the Ministry of Health of Moldova, but in general, this is a monstrous statement. You know, I want to say that the theme of victory in the Great Patriotic War, and everything related to it, causes the current Moldovan authorities to simply rage. It's not a nervous reaction. It's not a painful emotion. It's a demoniac. Everything is being done to belittle, to cancel even the significance of the great victory. In the 22nd year, remember, Moldova banned the wearing of symbols of the great victory, including the St. George ribbon. The broadcast of military patriotic films was cancelled. Now they have taken up the songs. The very songs that were sung all their lives in Moldova itself. They sang beautifully both in Russian and in Moldovan. By the way, in Romanian too. You know, on the 3rd of March, a musical ensemble from Israel was literally forced to apologize. For what? For the performance at the music festival in Chisinau, known all over the world, precisely because it was performed during the Great Patriotic War, and then by veterans of the song Katyusha. Because this is allegedly Russian propaganda, here it was necessary to come up with. But the citizens of Moldova, and we never doubted them, those who really love Moldova knew, and they know, by the way, Moldovans and the character have always been sure that they will not let themselves be offended. They launched flash mobs. They launched a campaign using this song in different languages, including Moldovan. This is a worthy response of worthy citizens of their country. But these attempts to falsify the history of Moldova, the history of the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, they are already taking on the scale of the state disaster of Moldova. The Ministry of Education of the Republic has developed a new textbook on the history of Romanians and general history, in which historical facts are simply turned upside down, especially in the section devoted to the Great Patriotic War. The authors justify the participation of Antonescu's army, and he, you remember, was on the side of Hitler's Germany, and its defeat at Stalingrad is described as nothing but, to quote directly from this participant, a catastrophe. Soldiers of the Red Army are called occupiers, Romanian Nazi collaborators. Do you know what they are called? Administrators. Such a biased approach is practiced in Chisinau in relation to the recent history of Moldova. Do you want a fresh example? On the 2nd of March, 33 years have passed since the beginning of the Transnistrian conflict. In Chisinau, the event was held under slogans, such militant slogans, with calls for increased militarization, looked more like a military parade even. Russia was directly accused of unleashing the conflict. The assessment of the situation is that it was Russia that, since the beginning of the Transnistrian conflict, took an active position in finding ways to resolve it. It was thanks to our country that the armed phase of the conflict between Chisinau and Tiraspol was stopped. This is exactly what the official authorities in Chisinau don't like. Perhaps that is why there are repeated calls for the withdrawal of Russian peacekeepers from the region, while simultaneously militarizing Moldova by the hands of the West. But it should be done at the expense of the citizens of this country itself. We have repeatedly warned that all this is fraught with an increase in tension in the region and increases the possibility of a return to military scenarios for resolving the conflict. As guarantors of mediation in the Transnistrian settlement, Russia sees its task first of all in reliably ensuring peace, calm on the Dniester and the soonest withdrawal of the negotiation process from the impasse. Fortunately, inside Moldova itself, politicized views on historical events and attempts to distort them do not meet with understanding. The question is whether the country's authorities will find the strength to get off the false path imposed on them and remember that they are the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the victorious soldiers in the Great Patriotic War. Here we are today. I have already answered a question today regarding the artistic so-called films that are produced in the West about the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, in which not just everything is turned upside down, but fakes are simply incorporated. That's right. Here's another story. On the other hand, this lie makes its way in order to gain a foothold in the minds of those who do not know history or do not know it well. But I say again, I see how Moldovans resist this and defend their own history, the story of their own ancestors and their heroes.
Thank you very much for the answers. We have everything.
So let's go further. Is the Media Corporation of China with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We are with you. We have two questions today. On the 5th of March, a report on the work of the Chinese government was published. It states that according to the results of the 24th year, the country's GDP grew by 5% year-on-year. At the same time, China accounted for about 30% of global economic growth. Also for the current year, the government has kept the GDP growth target at 5%. Plans to continue to intensify the implementation of the Artificial Intelligence Plus strategy, the development of food, production, forces of a new type. And the question is, how do you assess the sustainability of the Chinese economy, its role in the global context, especially given the slowdown in the global economy? And what impact do you think China's technological initiatives will have on international cooperation? As you know, China ranks first in the world in terms of GDP, in terms of purchasing power parity, and second in terms of the nominal size of the national economy. China remains and continues to be such a locomotive, the most important locomotive of global growth. We proceed from the fact that the development of the economy, an increase in trade volumes, an increase in the standard of living of the population of all countries, meets the interests of the international community and humanity as a whole. And it is from this point of view that we consider this topic. And new technologies, in particular new information technologies, play an important role in promoting the global process. And we are pleased with the success of our Chinese friends in this area. Modern opportunities in the field of artificial intelligence in particular open up new prospects for high-quality growth. Of course, there are many challenges associated with it, but as always, scientific and technical achievements are associated with certain problematic issues, with setting new tasks, ensuring security in various spheres. But it seems to me, so to speak, this is a natural course of events, and taking into account all these nuances, and with respect for the fundamental principles, I think that one can only be happy for those who, like China in particular, are developing science and technology and achieving good results, and sometimes even its advanced results. We stand for equal access to new technologies for everyone. This is in the interests of universal security, accelerating widespread economic growth, and reducing the digital divide between countries. We are ready to develop mutually beneficial partnership with China and other friendly countries in the field of new technological initiatives, and, in particular, artificial intelligence. Thank you very much. And the second question is exactly how this economic growth is being restricted in every possible way. The other day, the United States doubled import duties on goods from China from 10 to 20%, accusing Beijing of the so-called ineffective fight against fentanyl. In addition, the United States has imposed trade duties on Mexico, Canada, in the amount of 25%. China has sued the US for these tariff measures under the tow dispute settlement mechanism. Mexico has prepared response packages Canada has blocked similar steps. And how does Russia assess these US actions and their global consequences? You know, I think this topic has become traditional here. And when has it been different in recent years? All the time, some obstacles, sanctions, stop lists, restrictions were invented against those, in particular, China, who were viewed in the West as a competitor, but as if competition. How many times have we talked about it? They can no longer endure. Apparently, because they understand that they are losing in this direction, respectively, they resort to all kinds of sanctions clubs. At a certain stage, sanctions. At another stage, duties and measures and so on. Trade relations between Russia and China, should be considered in the context of our relations. Again, comprehensive partnership, strategic interaction. They are not subject to market changes. For almost 15 years, China has been our largest foreign trade counterparty, and in recent years, Russia has been ranked 4th or 5th in the country's ranking of China's main trading partners. Positive dynamics prevail in our foreign economic relations. Following the results of the 24th year, the volume of trade turnover has reached a new record level, and we expect that in the 25th year, Russian-Chinese practical cooperation will continue to grow steadily, despite external pressure and despite turbulence in international affairs and the world economy, the political will of the parties, and the conditions created thanks to the personal attention of the leaders of the two countries, and the complex work of intergovernmental mechanisms are available for this. Moscow and Beijing do not share a contradictory norm in this logic of protectionism, trade wars, and will undoubtedly use all opportunities to protect their legitimate interests. And in this regard, the strengthening of bilateral cooperation fully meets the objectives of the integrated national development of the two countries and has a general stabilizing effect on the global economy. As I said when answering your previous question, our countries are strengthening coordination on relevant multilateral platforms, speaking from similar positions on such key topics as the democratization of the global economic governance system, upholding the unacceptability of illegitimate sanctions, trade barriers, protectionism, and non-fulfillment of financial obligations by developed countries towards developing economies. This model of equal and mutually beneficial cooperation between the two powers is attractive to other like-minded people from among the countries of the global majority who share our approaches to building a more just and democratic world order. So, if you have everything with us or the TV channel Rush Today.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, hello to you. I congratulate you on the upcoming holiday.
Thank you.
I also congratulate all the girls present. Maria Vladimirovna, how does Moscow feel about the riots in the Serbian parliament, which were led by representatives of the pro-Western opposition, including members of the parliamentary friendship group with Ukraine? Especially taking into account the government's statement that the West is encouraging a color revolution in Serbia, and that a protest action called Yes Day is planned for March 15th in Belgrade.
Well, it seems to me that Serbia, as a democratic state, should again deal with internal issues itself, taking into account the independence of its country. This is the first thing. Secondly, to be honest, whether you have heard or not, I am more interested from the point of view of international relations, whether the Serbian delegation to the UN has withdrawn its vote on anti-Russian resolutions. That's what interests me, to be honest. I haven't seen any messages on this yet. I hope that given the official Belgrade's statement that it was a mistake, it will be done, and accordingly, some statements will probably be made. And then you say that a certain faction, a certain friendship group with Ukraine, staged pogroms somewhere there and so on. Let me remind you that officially the state of Serbia voted on anti-Russian resolutions. I called it a mistake later, but the mistake can be corrected. Just withdraw your vote. Write an appropriate letter. I say again, I don't know if it's done or not done. This really seems to me to be the reason for our comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is the news with us? Yes. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, you have partially answered it. Since the 3rd of March, the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine has stopped issuing letters of assistance to journalists and cultural workers, including artists, singers and artists, to leave the country. It was noted that this was done because many of them do not return to the country after traveling abroad. Why, in your opinion, did the Kyiv authorities resort to such a decision? Will it be effective? I just said in the introductory part about this, that this is already a crisis of the genre, that they apparently cannot scrape together, even those who are lured by supposedly free contracts. But we understand what methods they use from among 18-year-olds, trying to recruit into this very meat grinder in Ukraine. I just commented on it. I just have nothing more to say in addition to this except emotions. Do you understand? And the question is that it seems to me that it has already become clear, even to the citizens of Ukraine, that Zelensky simply chained them to this very pillar of his own corruption, poured blood on them, and simply mocks the entire people of Ukraine. That's what's going on. And then, unfortunately, if this bloody madman is not stopped, it will be worse. Thank you very much, Maria Vladimirovna. Is Ukraine with us? Ru? Yes. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. I also congratulate you on the upcoming holiday. Thank you for not forgetting about the troubles of ordinary residents in the new territories of Russia, about those who are waiting for liberation from the Kiev regime in Ukraine. The question is as follows. Zelensky behaves inconsistently in almost all matters, from negotiations with Russia to interaction with the United States. Logic, of course, is not worth looking for here. So I'm interested to know your opinion. Why does a politician behave like this? And you, as a diplomat, surely have some professional secrets. Here's how to communicate with Zelensky in this case. Here you say, logic is not worth looking for, but it is there. It's very simple. This is the preservation of one's own power. This is a painful ambition. This is a crazy global scale of corruption that unites world figures, including some world elites. This is a neglect of his duties as the head of state and a responsible statesman. These are questions that have gone beyond legitimacy, I mean overdue, which no one can answer, and is not going to. Again, because the main thing on the agenda is to preserve Zelensky's own power. This is a fragmented and defeated system of state law enforcement agencies in Ukraine, which has not been working for many years. It didn't start with the 22nd year. It has been shattered. It has been corrupted by the system of public administration. It was denationalized under the guise of supposedly, so to speak, embroidered and pasted goats, forelegs and something else there. In fact, there was a denationalization of the Ukrainian state apparatus. People with passports of other countries were incorporated there under the guise of Ukrainians. The government of Ukraine was filled with incomprehensible people, just sometimes with crooks from other countries, and sometimes with special services employees under the guise of supposedly effective managers, and so on. And so on, and so on. Instead of democratic processes, the people of Ukraine were offered an endless bazaar in the form of Maidan, which had no influence on the real solutions to the needs of the Ukrainian people, but represented such a democratic gum. It seems like, so to speak, the jaws close, it seems like there is salivation, But in fact, no food gets anywhere. That's what, so to speak, occupied the people of Ukraine for many years. And against this background, nationalists were trained for Russophobia. To agor, not only on Russophobia, they lined up militants, pulled up weapons, distributed funds, handed over fake documents, were engaged in preparing and carrying out coup. So, as a matter of fact, we have answered the question of what, so to speak, is the logic of what is happening now. Among other things, a sickly person is not only sickly ambitious, but also dependent. This has been talked about in Ukraine for many years. No one believed it. Then it became obvious during, so to speak, foreign voyages. When a person behaves inadequately, there are no emotions. There is no fatigue, not from chronic diseases, but from dependence on the appropriate drugs and substances. Well, and how to communicate with him, Maria Vladimirovna, and who communicates with him. Thank you. So, let's move on. Li Xinhua is with us.
Hello,
Yes, hello.
Vladimirovna. Our everything. I congratulate you on the table holiday and the other girls present. I have two questions for you. First, the first one. Recently, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that relations between China and Russia, two major powers, have a powerful internal driving force. These relationships cannot be affected by the actions of a third party. In your opinion, what is the reason for the presence of such an internal movement of force in our bilateral relations? Thank you.
You know, I will repeat some basic theses again. Russia-China is the largest neighboring state. The experience of interaction between our peoples, which has been formed over several centuries, has acquired an absolutely new quality in the last 75 years with the formation of the People's Republic of China, but is characterized by comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction. This is not a fixed formula. It is a lively, dynamically developing interstate cooperation for the benefit of sustainable development and protection of the fundamental national interests of the two countries. It is not aggression, destruction, or a destructive agenda that interests us. We are interested in creation, cooperation, mutual assistance, and the corresponding result. Our cooperation gives both for our states and for the international world agenda. The vital energy of our relations is a solid alloy of deep historical traditions of friendship and mutual trust, based on unconditional respect for political culture, sovereignty, territorial integrity of each other and loved ones, or coinciding approaches to solving key world problems. The leaders of our countries have repeatedly stressed that Russian-Chinese bilateral cooperation surpasses the classic Cold War alliances in quality and compares favorably with the Western concept of the so-called rules-based order. There, in this very order, supposedly based on rules, but in fact, there is only one rule there. This is the rule of the strong, or the rights of the strong. There is a rigid hierarchical system based on the dictates of the military, political, financial, economic, and even cultural humanitarian spheres. And Russian-Chinese relations are not of a bloc, confrontational nature. They are not directed against third countries. We do not build military political alliances. Our friendship is primarily aimed at benefiting ourselves, and as a product and result, it also benefits the world as a whole. In an attempt to disrupt our bilateral relations, we are ready to give a decisive rebuff by, as it was formulated, double counteraction. The Russian-Chinese bond is an important stabilizing factor in world affairs. It makes a significant contribution to the democratization of the system of international relations, the construction of a more just multipolar world order, the interaction of our countries within the framework of multilateral organizations and forums, such as the IONS, the SCO and the BRICS, and the G20 and APEC, is being consolidated. And of course, we appreciate the balanced position of the Chinese side side on the Ukrainian issue. We note its efforts to find a political and diplomatic solution to the crisis. Together with Beijing, we stand for the promotion of a just multipolar world order based on the countries of the global south. We see the construction of an open and indivisible new security architecture in Eurasia as an important step on this path. We agree that the long-term resolution of the conflict in the space of our continent is based on the identification and elimination of contradictions that cause these crises, and as it can be seen, in general, we have repeatedly expressed this. Such a high level of political trust in interstate and public interaction has the necessary strength to counter external pressure and cannot be sacrificed to the momentary political conjuncture. Now, as for the 80th anniversary of the victory in the war of resistance of the Chinese people to the Japanese invaders, and the World Anti-Fascist War, this year is special for our country. Our people, citizens of all republics of the Soviet Union, celebrate the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people. In the Great Patriotic War, the theme of victory over fascism and victory over militarism will be the leitmotif of all Russian-Chinese contacts in the Jubilee year, at all levels, including the highest level, joining forces for the sake of preserving the memory of the past war, for the sake of countering attempts to distort the history of the events that took place. The leaders of many friendly countries will gather in Moscow for the celebration in May, including, as announced by official Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping, according to the decision of Russian President Vladimir Putin, in commemoration of the decisive contribution of the Soviet Army to the defeat of Japanese troops in the Far East. Large-scale celebrations with a military parade dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the defeat of militaristic Japan, will be held in Khabarovsk in early September, and we expect that high-ranking leaders from friendly countries of Northeast Asia, who took part in the fighting against the Japanese occupiers, will also come and take part in this event. The head of the Russian state received an invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend the celebrations planned in Beijing, dedicated to the anniversary of the victory of the Chinese people in the war of resistance against Japan. It is known, and this is a well-known fact, that it was the Soviet Union and China that took the brunt of fascist Germany and militaristic Japan, respectively. Having gone through the unprecedented hardships of the treacherous invasion, having experienced all the horrors of that war, the Soviet and Chinese peoples waged a fierce struggle shoulder to shoulder with the aggressors, and at the cost of innumerable victims, they won, standing at the origins of the formation of the post-war world order. The defeat of Nazi Germany and militaristic Japan marked the collapse of the claims of adherents of the misanthropic ideology of Nazism to world domination. Attempts to enslave entire peoples, deprive them of their national culture, identity, and traditional values. The result of the war was the formation of a new system of international relations, which was based on international law, the creation of the United Nations, and the attempts of Western countries to distort the history of the Second World War, to belittle the role of the USSR and China in achieving victory, aimed at revising the foundations of the post-war world order, scrapping the mechanisms of global governance, forming a new type of relations based on certain rules that are established, as we now understand their logic, Western logic by force. We are witnessing more frequent attempts to rehabilitate Nazism and racial superiority, the glorification of the Nazis and their accomplices, the revival of other practices of racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. For example, the Kyiv regime, with the full support of the majority of European governments, is carrying out large-scale discrimination and destruction of its own citizens by the Kyiv regime on ethnic and religious grounds, which provoked the heaviest security crisis in Europe since the Second World War. Realizing the danger of such a development of events, Russia and China are making joint efforts to protect the history of the past war, combat falsification, and revise its results.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lee Reuter is with us.
Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I join my colleagues in congratulating them on the upcoming holiday. And we have questions that are devoted to the recent statements by both Russian and US representatives about their readiness for peace talks on Ukraine. In particular, Russia speaks at a high and top level about its readiness for peace negotiations. Trump is also talking about this. And in particular, he even said after the recent scandal in the White House that he had received a letter from Zelensky with a willingness to sit down at the negotiating table as soon as possible. Against the background of all these talks about potential peace talks, are there any planned contacts between the Russian foreign minister and his American counterpart, or contacts at the expert level? Accordingly, if so, when can they take place? And when, in Russia's opinion, will it be necessary or possible to involve representatives of Ukraine in such contacts?
Well, you probably want to make some kind of world sensation right now, so that in 2 phrases or in 3 words, I would tell you everything. It seems to me that it is obvious that the adjustment of those Russian-American contacts that were literally killed in the previous American administration is now underway. The ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States of America, Mr. Darchev, has been appointed, who, obviously, will be engaged in restoring these ties. These contacts are already there in place. As for the issue of peaceful settlement, it is complex and requires, as you absolutely correctly said, discussion of details at the expert level. We continue to expect the US administration to appoint an official representative to launch the negotiation process and form a team of negotiators. Accordingly, after that we will be able to pick up a vis-a-vis from the Russian side. As for the participation of representatives of Ukraine in the negotiations, well, we can talk a lot, fantasize about this, but there are facts, realities. The first point is Zelensky's expired term of office, his, so to speak, questionable legitimacy. And the second point is the current decree signed by Zelensky himself, prohibiting negotiations with the Russian country, with the Russian leadership, until those issues are somehow resolved, not settled, not eliminated. All Ukrainian statements on this matter are simply, again, as if unsupported by anything. Let's call it that. Let's say diplomatically. Well, that's it. No. And then there's another point. But could you tell me, maybe I missed something, and that there was some formalized concept of a peaceful settlement on the Ukrainian side, like a negotiation process? We see only such, dummy memes that fill the ethereal space. Something like a formula for victory, then trouble, then peace, then something else behind which there is nothing. Have you heard anything in particular? The second point, I have just commented on this gathering in London on the 2nd of March. Have you heard about the world there somewhere? Yesterday, Macron, the French president, came to the microphone talking about supporting Ukraine and talking only about the fighting, doesn't say a word about the world. Here is the Danish Prime Minister, who also says that he stands in solidarity with Ukraine, says that war is better than peace. Where do you hear this from those who support Zelensky's words about peace, about the peace process, peaceful settlement, diplomacy, and the political process? Where? Nowhere does anyone say this from those who are sponsors of the Kyiv regime in every sense of the word. And you ask me the question, how to connect Ukraine to what? And as he was connected to the bare wires, so it shakes. Do you understand? That's it. So let's go. Yes. Is there more? Thank you.
No, not anymore. Thank you very much.
So, is Belarus Info with us? Yes. Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon. And we have such a question, just in continuation of the topic that the rapper raised. Meetings of Russian representatives with representatives of the United States were held now, and representatives of the foreign ministry also participated there. And here are the advantages that the Russian side has at these meetings. And so that, as you mentioned today, and repeatedly stressed by President Vladimir Putin and head of mission Lavrov, eliminate the root causes of the conflict and reach a firm agreement that suits Russia. And what agreements, according to the Foreign Ministry, should suit us, if we can talk about this now? So, can I ask you a question again? What are the Foreign Ministry's agreements? What advantages does the Russian side have at these meetings in order to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and reach a firm agreement that suits Russia? You know, it seems to me that we need to talk about the advantage of our country, not in any specific negotiations, but in principle in this situation, in this historical context. Our advantage is that the truth is on our country. This is the strongest advantage. This is an advantage that inspires. This is an advantage that gives strength, even in the most desperate situations. This is an advantage that helps to find the right way. That's really it. Because how many times in our history have there been when, but there seems to be no way out. And suddenly, if our cause is really right, he is. In this case, there is no doubt that the truth is on our side. Or should I say, we are on the side of the truth, and we are fighting for it, do you understand? We didn't just cling to this truth, in order, you know, to somehow survive a difficult moment, or, so to speak, to hold on, as we used to say, for red. No, we defend it. We are trying to return her, abused, even raped somewhere, mangled, distorted truth, to its original appearance. We are fighting for the truth, for basic ideas about man and humanity. We are fighting for historical facts, for those people who gave their lives, again for the truth. That's the advantage, undeniable, and the one that cannot be blocked with anything. Now, as for Russia's position on regulation, it is well known and remains unchanged. I won't be going around and around for a long time on this score. I will say what I think needs to be said in this case. And it was in this very hall on the 14th of June of the 24th year that the President of the Russian Federation voiced the basic position in detail on the Russian view of the complex situation and the way out of it. That's our approach. Everything is formulated there. Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. And can I have another little comment? And since the United States is also communicating, and today Marco Rubio said that the conflict in Ukraine is actually a proxy war between two nuclear powers, and Russia and the United States. In other words, this is how, in this vein, we can use these proposals formulated by the President in communication with the United States. Sorry again, I didn't hear you. Yes, but since there is a concept that the President outlined on June 14th, speaking at the Foreign Ministry here, and there is a statement, for example, by the American Secretary of State, made just today, that the conflict in Ukraine is a proxy war between two nuclear powers of the United States and Russia. That is like this. Is that Macron? Are you talking about Macron? I just don't know. No, Rubio's schmark today. So once again, let's just be interrupted all the time. Marco Rubio has declared a proxy war, that the conflict in Ukraine, a proxy war between two nuclear powers, Russia and the USA. It has been said about this repeatedly in the White House, that if it had not been for the previous American administration, the situation would have been completely different, and that it is the work of Biden and his team to unleash this conflict. They said so. Call it whatever you want, or quote anyone there. Proxy, not proxy. We used the word hybrid war, multi-component. To be honest, I don't want to analyze what Rubio said right now. I want to say our position. Well, the truth is, it only finds more and more confirmations. Indeed, a hybrid war was launched against us. Many, by the way, I remember, grimaced and said, "Come on." Do you remember how Schultz also laughed that he was supposedly amused by the fact that there was a genocide of the Russian-speaking and Russian population in the Donbass under the Kyiv regime? No, it is. This is a hybrid war, which is based on the reincarnation of neo-Nazism as an ideology and various tools, including those times with elements of genocide pronounced, when the population of a certain ethnic and socio-cultural group had to either leave the territories on their own or mimic the requirements that were presented to them, are completely incompetent. How similar it all is to the plan of the rest. Therefore, it just acquired a new technological character. This obviously had another trade component of trade wars, the redistribution of spheres of influence, the redistribution of the sphere of markets, not the sphere of markets, but the redistribution of markets. Well, yes, that's what we called it. I'm just going to repeat once again. This is being confirmed more and more. And more political and statesmen are making statements specifically denouncing the wrongness, and in some places, even perhaps, the obvious lies of the West, which blamed Russia for everything. They say that the West is to blame. It's the voices of the West that are already spreading. This confirms precisely that we are right. Thank you, Marina Vladimirovna. Thank you. Is Radio Saga with us?
Yes, good afternoon. Today, I congratulate you on the upcoming holiday. You have the strength, patience, energy to do the necessary work for you, and of course, we always congratulate the girls. The situation in Ukraine and future negotiations. So, in what form can the guarantees of the security of the Republic, or the remnants of the Republic of Ukraine look like? Which, they will arrive both Americans and Europeans, as in the Russian Federation.
You know, this is an amazing story, but it seems to me that this is the case when Ukraine can provide security guarantees for itself, namely, to return to the origins of its statehood, enshrined, among other things, in the Declaration of 1990 on its state sovereignty. We are talking about a neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status, rejection of Nazi ideology, and respect for human rights, primarily ethnic Russians, and the Russian-speaking population, but not to a lesser extent, all other ethnic groups. That's the security guarantee for you. They're all looking for her somewhere else. Everyone who had the Kyiv regime and Ukraine as a state, looking for guarantees of their own security in the West, betrayed them. They took advantage of their, I don't know, naivety, stupidity, credulity, and they just used Ukraine against her in the first place. And how is it? The casket just opened, and the key was lying next to it. The guarantee is exactly what I said. There may be.
Can I have the second hour?
Of course.
In relation to the European Union, as the Russian Federation has other structures, Russia treats Ukraine's possible membership in the European Union. However, this is the subject or...
I can't hear. I'm sorry, please. I can't hear. Can I have a counter, please?
How does Russia or your agency feel about Ukraine's possible membership in the European Union? This is an object of difficult naturally, to decode more and more. But how do you feel about it?
You know about Ukraine's membership in the European Union? Don't you remember? After all, this is exactly where it all started. And this impurity of the official authorities of Ukraine in relation to its own population, the impurity of the game on several fronts, so to speak, led to the fact that Ukraine simply tore everything up. That's how it all started. If then this issue had been treated not opportunistically, not irresponsibly, but with deep study, with an understanding of the combination of one's own history and one's own national interests, I think all this could have been avoided, and provocations would not even help, so to speak, to carry out a whole chain of coups on the territory of Ukraine. But flirting, inventing these non-existent development options, not taking into account the primordial interests, and simply geopolitical, economic realities, has plunged Ukraine into the abyss of all that it is going through now.
ввергла Украину в пучину всего того, что она сейчас
Why
переживает.
go back to that
Зачем сейчас
now?
опять к
You
этому
understand it's
возвращаться?
not just a
Вот
matter of
давайте
our
очень только
attitude.
вопрос
I can say
нашего
for a
отношения.
long
Могу
time
долго говорить о
that in
том, что
recent
за
years, the
последние
EU has
годы
simply
ЕС
mutated into
смутировал
the
в
economic
дипломатический
department
отдел
of NATO,
НАТО.
but that's
Вопрос
not
стоит
the only
только в
question.
этом.
The question
Вопрос
is
в том,
that
что
this
это
is our
наша оценка,
assessment.
а
And
суть-то
what's
в
the
чем?
point? That membership
В
in the
том, что
European Union will become a
панацеей
panacea for
станет
Ukraine? Will they
для
all chip
Украины
in and start
членство в
rebuilding
Европейском Союзе.
Ukraine?
А
Will they
если
start
таким образом
integrating
начнут
Ukraine into their
восстанавливать
own
Украину,
space?
они начнут интегрировать Украину в свое собственное
But
пространство,
you
то
yourself,
вы же
as a
сами, как
representative of
представитель, в
Western
том
Europe
числе
and
Западной,
Northern
но и
Europe,
Северной
you
Европы,
perfectly
вы прекрасно
understand how the EU
понимаете,
members are acting now
как
and
сейчас
what they are doing
действует
with new member
ЕС
states
и
or
что они
candidate
делают
countries.
с новыми странами-членами или странами, кандидатами в члены.
That this is
Что это
definitely not a
точно не
job
работа,
related to their
связанная с
well-being as newcomers,
благополучием
but
как
this work
новичков,
is
а
connected
это
with pumping out
работа
of them
связана с
all the
выкачкой из них
resources and
ресурсов,
opportunities for the
возможностей
benefit
во
of the
благо
already existing member states of the
уже
European
существующих
Union.
стран-членов Европейского Союза.
This must be
Это же нужно
understood.
понимать.
Well, I'll tell you what the Icelanders don't want. The elite wants and politicking wants. That is, Mariana, answer in the negative. Does Russia treat Ukraine negatively?
It seems to me that this question, in my opinion, is simply inappropriate, not because I don't want to answer it, but because it is absolutely not relevant right now. It's just shaking the air. To talk about Ukraine's membership in some economic integration associations at the current stage. What are we talking about? The country collapsed there. There, people are torn out of their homes every day and thrown to this bloody monster Zelensky. And you say there, let's speculate about how they will integrate into the Western world economic system. They don't have their own economy. They have an entire economy on injections, on corruption, on, so to speak, some handouts, and, of course, on lending. To what? What should I connect? Over there, the resource base is divided. They can't divide it in any way. You are asking me questions about some subtleties of diplomacy again. Who treats what from the point of view of the possibilities of economic, so to speak, interconnections? Here, everyone who is not lazy is pulling Ukraine apart. That's it, because she brought herself to such a state, forgetting about what sovereignty and true independence and national interest and her own history are. So, is there a Pakistani TV channel with us?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Shahid Gumman.
Thank you very much. I represent 92 News Pakistan. My first question is, if Russia reaches a peace agreement with Ukraine with the mediation of the United States, what conditions or guarantees will Russia need to conclude such an agreement? Will sanctions with Russia be lifted? We do not speak out and do not discuss the issue of lifting sanctions. We did not introduce them in relation to ourselves. We have always said that they have a destructive, unauthorized nature. And first of all, they hit those in relation to who invented them and who drove them. Why? Because we introduce counter-sanctions. We respond. Therefore, to argue on this topic, well, what's the point? There's no point. You ask these questions to those who imposed these sanctions. What plans do they have? What do they want? How are they going to get out of the current impasse and the situation that they have created themselves? This question is not for us. We have always stressed that sanctions are not legitimate if they have not passed the UN Security Council. Everything else is an instrument of trade wars, hybrid wars, pressure, interference in internal affairs, destruction of the international legal foundations of interaction between countries, and cooperation. Therefore, our position is clear. It is known that with regard to the lifting or not lifting of sanctions, it is you who imposed them. Secondly, or returning to the first question, if Russia reaches a peace agreement with Ukraine and what conditions, then we constantly say about it that it is necessary to eradicate the root causes of the crisis. If you believe that there is some kind of button that needs to be pressed, and the phrase guarantees have worked will be displayed on the scoreboard, then it probably doesn't happen that way. If you think that there is some kind of mechanism or apparatus, I don't know, that can simply be activated and it will guarantee something, it doesn't work either. As we have seen, and international legal agreements are ignored, as we have seen, and bilateral agreements are ignored, as we have seen, and gentlemen's agreements are ignored. For example, there is no NATO expansion to the east. Assurances were given, so to speak, it was discussed at the talks, but despite this, NATO was still expanding to the east. So much for the price of some guarantees. Therefore, the root cause, the eradication of the root causes of the crisis. I listed them today, and they all contain, one way or another, our basic idea of the situation. The President's speech on June 14, 2014 year, so this is a really long-lasting natural guarantee. But look here right now, I'm sorry, I can't help but say, look, now the countries of the European Union, their presidents, prime ministers, are trying to appoint themselves almost as guarantors. Sometimes they are participants in the negotiation process. Then they declare that they can guarantee something. What can they guarantee? They could not guarantee the safety of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline, which delivered natural resources to them in the form of gas, for their own well-being. They could not guarantee the safety of their own energy well-being. They could not even guarantee the investigation of this terrorist attack. Do you understand how, with such attempts, you can claim security guarantees, I don't know, of a region, continent, or another country? They cannot guarantee themselves on the issues I have mentioned, in particular energy security. And at the same time, they believe that they can control the whole world. The second question. There is growing concern in the US about a possible trade war with Canada, China, and Mexico. From Russia's point of view, how will such a trade conflict affect world markets and Russia's trade relations with these countries? It seems to me that it is too early to talk about some kind of trade, as you said, some kind of large-scale trade war. Indeed, we are seeing another round of tariff escalation. This is obvious, but we also see that Beijing, Mexico City, and Tava have announced the introduction or readiness to introduce retaliatory measures, contacts between the countries in order to settle American trade claims, as far as is known from official reports, are continuing. In other words, the countries are conducting some kind of dialogue. At the same time, we see that this is not a new technique or a new tactic for the current owners of the White House. Similar ultimatums to trade partners were put forward during Trump's first presidential term. Often, various states made concessions or negotiated, not wanting to lose access to the American market. Perhaps they will follow the same scenario now. In any case, the violation of international trade agreements by one of the world's largest countries will negatively affect the global economy, and unilateral unjustified tariff increases are contrary to TOE norms. And this will contribute to the growth of protectionism and the weakening of the multilateral trading system. And in case of increased trade friction, the whole world is waiting for instability of world markets for industrial products, food products, energy resources, disorganization of global supply chains, transport and logistics routes. I think everyone will be affected in one way or another. We are probably less dependent on the North American market now, as we have reoriented our commodity flows to friendly countries. Anti-Russian sanctions contributed to all this. I mean, well, that's about how I could answer your question. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Come on with us. Thank you. Yes, hello. I would also like to congratulate the beautiful ladies on the upcoming holiday. We wish you all happiness, warmth, and only good news. But we come to our question. Today we have only one. Why is it that the entry of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan, as well as 8 other citizens of this country, has been blocked right now? What unfriendly steps by Tokyo prompted Russia to take this step? As you know, we do not publicly comment on the details of the Russian side's decision to introduce personal restrictions against foreign citizens. We, as a rule, never do this. There is an exception, of course, when we see the same steps in our address. But in this case, we adhere, so to speak, not to publicity in this matter. At the same time, we would like to remind you once again that since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine in February of the 22nd year, the Japanese government has been implementing an unprecedented unfriendly policy towards our country. Among the anti-Russian measures of the 1st of March of the 22nd year, the so-called sanctions list was included by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. As a mirror response, the Russian stop list was made by the then Japanese Foreign Minister. Our current step in terms of restrictions affecting the Japanese Foreign Minister is the actualization of countermeasures taking into account the continuation of the hostile course of official Tokyo, including new so-called sanctions packages and direct logistical, military-industrial assistance to the Kyiv regime. While maintaining such a Japanese foreign policy line, we will be ready to further work out additional counteraction measures. We invariably proceed from the fact that the resumption of a full-fledged interstate dialogue and mutually beneficial practical cooperation with Japan is possible only after the Japanese authorities completely abandon attempts to damage the economy and security of our country, as well as its citizens. Thank you. Thank you. Lee News is with us. The front. Yes, hello. International News Agency News Front, Bulgarian edition. Let me also join in the congratulations on the upcoming holiday. Thank you. And if I may, 2 questions. The first question regarding the statement of the leader of the Kyiv regime, Zelensky, and his demands for a truce. I will begin with a quote. The first stages of the truce could be the release of prisoners and a ceasefire in the sky, a ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs dropped on energy facilities and other non-military infrastructure, as well as an immediate ceasefire at sea." End quote. It doesn't become particularly clear whether Zelensky is talking about his willingness to take such steps or what. And as far as I know, Ukraine does not take its prisoners. And if they are not from Azov, for example, the Human Rights Council. Tatiana Moskalkova published a list at the end of December, which indicated 630 persons that Ukraine does not take away. Is the fate of these people known? Ukraine has taken the initiative to take them away. And based on Zelensky's statement about the ban on missiles and other weapons, is it possible to initiate an international mechanism prohibiting the use of ammunition that is already fixed in the use of the armed forces of Ukraine? You know, I understand that you have only one question. Here is the last phrase. Regarding the idea of creating an international mechanism prohibiting the use of certain types of ammunition, I can only assume that the current situation in the negotiation formats that deal with issues of disarmament and arms control, but hardly creates prospects for practical implementation at this stage. You understand perfectly well what position is there and who takes it. And about the list of Ukrainian prisoners, has Ukraine taken the initiative to take them away? 30 persons. In December of the 24th year, there was such a report. Are there any steps in this direction for the exchange? I'll clarify. Yeah. And one more question. You talked about this topic today about the steel porcupine and so on. It's not me. It's not me. I was just quoting Ursula von der Leyen. I wouldn't have thought of that. I honestly admit. Well, here are just two more statements from her side, also very important. A colleague from International Life also asked, but nevertheless, she declared a certain era of armament. We urgently need to rearm Europe. More budgetary opportunities are needed to build up defense. I didn't spend it. If she hadn't probably spent such billions of dollars on vaccines, which she then destroyed, there would probably have been something to walk on. And now everyone is thinking about where to get money there. And as for aggressive rhetoric, it's also all clear. Their task is to plunge the European continent into such, so to speak, fans or idolaters of the liberal dictatorship. Their task, their aspiration, their dream is to plunge the European continent into the abyss of crises, and it's best to set the situation on the continent on fire at all. They don't think about peace. They don't have such aspirations. They dream of war. They talk about the battlefield. Then it means about power methods. Then about something there, I don't know, peace through pain, tears, and there are forces. I don't know what they're coming up with. It's all obvious. They do not hide their aggressive, militaristic, leading to collapse beliefs. Dangerous people, very dangerous people for Europe. For peaceful people, these people are dangerous. They are just as dangerous for normal people. They carry a destructive ideology. They try to manipulate people's minds. They spread fakes. Now they are all grabbing onto the topic of weapons, even nuclear weapons. Dangerous, very dangerous people. So, whether the tape is with us. Ru, yes. Good afternoon. Hello. I also join in congratulating you on International Women's Day. We have one question for you about what you have already touched upon today, and you have even partially answered it. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer have worked out a plan for a partial truce in Ukraine, which will last a month and will operate in the air of the sea and in relation to energy facilities. That's our question is as follows. Does it make sense to settle for a temporary and incomplete truce at the moment? And how? Yes. This plan has not been officially handed over to anyone. We only know about him through the mass media. All these manipulations with the words truce, temporary something, stopping something, fire or something else. Let them talk to themselves. We understand and know everything about them perfectly. And moreover, I say again, we rely on their own confessions, that under these words, as a rule, there is simply a desire for respite, rearmament, flashing in order to continue with renewed vigor later. Russia remains committed to the position that was announced by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, in June of the 24th year. We need a really stable peace, and not some pauses, not some temporary respites of the truce, which the enemy wants to use for rearmament. We need legally binding agreements and mechanisms that will protect against the resumption or repetition of the crisis. Thank you very much. Well, yes, thank you very much. And then we go to Bolt News. Namel. Yes, hello. Maria Vladimirovna, thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. You have already mentioned that representatives of the Baltic states were not invited to Sunday's summit in London, indicating that this is a luxury for rich countries. But if you go beyond that, I didn't say rich. I said that there is simply nothing to take from these. They obviously can't give anything. I think that maybe they just decided to save on coffee, so that they don't shuffle around the corridors and, so to speak, eat extra sandwiches. I think maybe even. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. What is happening, there may well be. Yes, maybe. Maria Vladimirovna, what is the influence of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia on decision-making within the EU? According to the assessment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's always been talked about. A destructive, aggressive minority that does not pursue national interests, but which, living on the handout of the relevant Western structures, on grants, or simply controlled from the outside by blackmail, is the conductor of this North Atlantic liberalism. That's it. If they thought about their people, if they thought about their countries, they would respect human rights, they would respect democratic norms and principles, they would appreciate the diversity that they have in their countries, cultural, ethnographic, ethnic, and so on, including linguistic. They would develop relationships with their neighbors. They would be engaged in trade. They would be engaged in industry, including their own in the first place. They would develop cultural and humanitarian ties. They could not even appreciate that Russia was disposed to them wholeheartedly. And our business, our tourists, our citizens came there, rested, left money as part of their vacations, bought real estate there. What for them was the only, by and large, natural arrival of profit. Not handouts, not the sale of national interests, but natural earnings through the provision of services. They couldn't even save it or evaluate it. Am I wrong? Well, isn't that so? I completely agree with you. And what is their benefit from the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine, in your opinion? What is their what? What are their benefits from the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine? But what is the benefit? They tell you they would have lost their own benefit, lost it, squandered it, which is direct, to have a state in direct neighbors, overflowing with resources, opportunities, means, and wishing for the peaceful development of relations. They couldn't even save that. What is the benefit there in Ukraine? They were given as much as they were given, so they performed somewhere in NATO or in the Council of Europe. And now they didn't let me sit on a chair and said that, so to speak, they don't need them. Let them wait there somewhere. Here, it may be that they did not spend money on tickets. The ticket is also firm, so to speak, the pocket of the European Commission, and you buy them. You understand, well, why is there an extra $20,000 or $30,000 for the arrival of some delegation of one of the Baltic countries there? It's better over there, I do not know, to transfer to the ESPU. Apparently they think, that's it, everything is so banal. What kind of statehood is there? What are you talking about? Everything was bought a long time ago, with Western grants, squandered and betrayed by their own people in these countries. Betrayed, betrayed. The people are loyal in these countries. So, thank you very much. Thank you, Anna Dalu. Only if possible, do not repeat the questions. Vladimirovna, you basically answered both of our questions. But there is one addition to the fact that a colleague from Bulgaria asked a question. She asked about Zelensky's proposal, and he had a part there about the exchange of prisoners, about the release of prisoners. Does Russia plan to include the release of prisoners convicted of supporting Moscow in Ukraine in the draft of a future peace agreement? And we are discussing it now is simply counterproductive and absolutely unnecessary. No negotiations have yet begun in this format. There are no documents on the table. We will not fantasize. This is painstaking work that will be carried out, of course, not at the microphones. Let's not even try to reason on this topic now. It's just that no one needs it, and it's the main thing that will harm the process. But he just said it for the first time, so it became interesting. One more time, if there is information that we can share, we will definitely do it. But it is simply unethical and inappropriate to talk in theory about what is not yet in practice. And in this case, it is also counterproductive. And with the coming upbringing, it's mutual with you too, is the author, and with us.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
On behalf of our editorial board, we cordially congratulate you on the upcoming holiday. Health. Stay as bright, energetic, so that all this ignorant scum can be effectively resisted. I wanted to start with the good news. Since Monday, Russian military pensioners have started receiving pensions. Again, on behalf of all pensioners, I would like to thank the Russian Foreign Ministry and you for your personal participation.
It seems to me that, after all, These words of gratitude apply in general to Russia and all the bodies and branches of government that deal with this issue. There is no one specific person or one specific structure here. We all worked together.
Everyone, we're all great. It's great to realize that something creative has begun after all. That's fine. Please tell me, yes, we have 3 questions today. Purely pathetically, the negotiations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Right here, right away, there is not hypothetically, in any way. We do not comment, first of all, because these are negotiations of the heads of state. This is the prerogative of the presidential administration. And secondly, there is no need to engage in fantasy right now. It just won't help matters.
But we can also potentiate what will happen in the director and our position of Russian speakers in the Baltic states in these negotiations.
You can.
Or for now.
I'm talking about myself now, so you can definitely. But in this case, we do not comment on the issue of negotiations between the heads of state, and especially those that have not yet been announced.
The second question I would like to draw your special attention to. We have a Russian citizen, a former riot policeman, Konstantin Nikulin, arrested in Lithuania, and he was awarded a life sentence. He has been in prison for more than 15 years, allegedly executed for participating in the shooting at the customs checkpoint of a copper worker on the 31st of July of the 91st year. So the guilt has not been proven, there is no ballistic examination, the evidence has disappeared, everything is sewn with white threads. There is even information that the British SAS took part in order to strengthen the negotiating position of the US at that time. George H.W. Bush on Gorbachev, the separation of Lithuania, and then the subsequent collapse of the USSR. But I don't even know how to formulate it, because could it be again the subject of negotiations at the highest level?
Again, we do not comment on these negotiations in any way. As for Konstantin Nikulin, he was indeed illegally convicted in Lithuania as part of an extremely politicized case. Numerous violations were committed both in terms of assessing the factual circumstances of the case and, of course, legal qualifications. No real evidence of his guilt was given. Witness statements were not taken into account. We protect his rights on an ongoing basis, in cooperation with lawyers. The issue is under special control of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our embassy in Lithuania, and we always approach all requests of our compatriot without unnecessary bureaucracy. We are in constant contact with him. Every month Russian diplomats visit him in the colony. He is provided with the necessary moral and material support, as well as work carried out with the prison administration, as a result of which it was possible to improve the conditions of his detention. Thanks to the efforts of our embassy, we have obtained from the Lithuanian side the necessary examinations of our citizen. We demand timely medical assistance to him. The Russian competent authorities have repeatedly requested the transfer of Konstantin Yurevich to Russia, in accordance with the Russian-Lithuanian agreement on the transfer of persons sentenced to imprisonment from June 25, 2001 years for serving their sentences. The Lithuanian side refused this. As for the prospects of his release using other mechanisms, this topic does not imply publicity. Period.
Let's hope so. And the final question. The BRICS Union has already existed since the year 2009. Last year, our country's chairmanship in this association was successfully completed, but at the same time, there are organizations that are trying to affiliate themselves with the activities of the BRICS, well, hiding behind the flag of the association, implementing their own projects. In particular, there is information in the media right now that there is such an organization as the International Alliance of BRICS Strategic Projects. Does the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation support the activities of this organization?
You know, to be honest, we have no direct relation to this structure. I can't say anything about it.
Thank you very much. Once again, happy holidays, and
thank you very much. Lee Rudov is with us. Rudov. So, if not with us, we will answer later. CC Times Cambodia edition. Colleagues.
Коллеги.
Then we will also answer later. I would also like to clarify, is the voice of the fatherland with us? All right.
Yes, hello.
Yes, hello.
Yes, we have one question today. Maria Vladimirovna. Well, it's also very important. Here, the new world order will be built against Russia, on the ruins of Russia, at the expense of Russia. This was said by Zbigniew Brzezinski, a former advisor to the US president on national security. As soon as Putin changed the nuclear doctrine with the counter's response to the possibility of striking directly at the sponsors of terrorism, the leader in the US presidential election changed dramatically. Instead of the heiress of the hostile Biden, the benevolent, in quotation marks, Trump came forward. And the threat of a strike on Russia with heavy missiles temporarily disappeared. But we understand that the US goal has not changed from this, the strategy has changed. And peace between Russia and other countries will lead to the strengthening of Russia and the collapse of the dollar empire. What the US will never voluntarily do. The elite of Europe and Ukraine are subordinates of America, they carry out all her orders. Just look at how they are destroying their economy and refusing gas on the orders of the United States. How blindly they do it, the same way.
Blind people. I'm very sorry, but we still have questions, not a declaration. If you can, ask a question. What is your question?
Don't you think that everything is going according to their plan? If Trump succeeds in deceiving the people of Russia again, everything can lead.
If everything went according to their plan. I do not know, however, who exactly you mean, but someone apparently, who hates us very much, we would no longer have, but we do, so not everything is going according to their plan. Thank you very much. Lee News is with us. Ru.
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
Edition of Less Than Earl Greater Than News. On behalf of our publication, I would like to congratulate you and all the ladies present here on the upcoming holiday of the 8th of March. We have two questions. The first of them has already been partially answered. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, called on the EU countries to increase defense spending by 1.5% of GDP in order to raise 650 billion euros for the production of weapons. She also offers to significantly accelerate military supplies to Ukraine through loans. In your opinion, will Brussels be able to replace Washington for the Ukrainian army in this case? And will the European Union face bankruptcy if it starts an arms race on credit?
They are going now. I mean those who run Brussels, with similar decisions on the neck of you taxpayers, ordinary citizens and hard workers. In some countries, this situation has changed because people, citizens are not satisfied with the fact that they are being robbed and that so many residents of the European continent are being killed with their money. This is the first thing. Secondly, you see they are. We need to look. Here you are putting it all into some formulas. Will the EU be able to replace the Americans supporting the Kyiv regime? It is necessary to let's essentially talk. They do not support the Kyiv regime. They are destroying Ukraine and killing citizens of the European continent. And, by the way, not only European, there are also a lot of people from other countries, from other continents and so on. That's what the money goes for and what they collect it for. Therefore, the question should sound the same way. Will they be able to raise as much money as it takes to kill even more people? This will be true, because it's not about the national identity of Ukraine. It's not about the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It's not about anything other than the massacre. They collect money for the slaughterhouse. If they wanted a prosperous Ukraine, they would let it develop. Ukraine, which seceded from the Soviet Union, but there were no prerequisites, even remote ones, that would suggest its collapse. She was prosperous, she was rich, she was promising. And so they flooded it with all their grants, sides, Soros, an endless look at how to corrupt it more, how to get everything of value out of it more, so everything went downhill. So that's what they're raising money for. Will they be able to compensate the United States in this sense? So there are not so many people left in Ukraine. Do you understand? Now, here's a little bit of a need to move away from memes and cliches in the direction of a real look at things.
Thank you, Maria Vladimirovna. And the second question is the president of Argentina. Why? Me.
Sorry, me too. I can't. That's the same thing. It's absurd. It's some kind of new dress of the king, when everyone seems to see reality, but no one can tell about it. Here they are calling. Just think about it. The countries of the European Union are calling Zelensky every day, so to speak, to mobilize even more citizens of Ukraine, while these same countries accept, so to speak, citizens of Ukraine who leave the territory of Ukraine and give them citizenship, residence permits, benefits, whatever they want. What is the logic of this? If they want this carnage to continue, then, so to speak, why create a maximum mode? I mean, if they are in favor of such a development of events, for mobilization to take place in Ukraine, for Ukrainians to defend themselves there, as they present it, then probably it is not necessary to accept them in the countries of the European Union and give them benefits for idleness. What is the logic? And the logic is only in one thing: chaos, disorganization, and preferably also the burning of the European continent by all available means. That's the logic of it. Peace on the European continent is a thing that has not often happened on the European continent. It was necessary to protect this world, which is what Russia has been calling for all the time. If you look at the history of Western Europe, this history is woven from wars. If you look at the history of Western Europe in the context of other countries, you will see endless expansion. Now, if you imagine the history of Western Europe, then speed up the historical process. Put it on rewind. You will see how they constantly attacked someone. Then we were attacked. Then they attacked each other. Then they attacked North Africa. Then, by the way, they attacked those with whom they were friends later. The United States of America, their own people, themselves. Do you understand? Then the Mediterranean was attacked there and below. Then Latin America. There was always some kind of aggressive policy. If you take the history of Western Europe there for 1,000 years, that's how it all happens. In general, it was not for nothing that they were twisted into some kind of integration structures so that they would stop doing this. But you see, they got loose again. Thank you very much for your congratulations. Let's move on.
Maria Vladimirovna, I would like to ask another question. Argentine President Javier Milei deleted all joint photos with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky on his social media page, after a quarrel that occurred between Zelensky and US President Donald Trump. What is the probability that this trend will continue and Zelensky will gradually fall into isolation in the international arena and turn into an outcast?
It's like children who cover their face with their hands and think they can't be seen. Here they have some kind of the same attitude to photography. It seems to me that they have not outgrown the period of a century ago when photography was just invented. They all live in some illusions that you can take a picture and it will mean, I do not know, there is some kind of victory. And if you don't take a picture or don't let someone take a picture, it means defeating someone. And if, let's say, to tear up a photo, it means there, I do not know, some other sacred phenomenon for them. Now, for some reason, they are erasing these photos and deleting them, despite the fact that there is a concept of internet cache memory in which all this is forever already. And everyone just laughs watching this process. I don't know, I think it's just some kind of how painful infantilism is. What hypocrisy. So, is the national course with us?
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Hello.
The national course is in touch. The newspaper congratulates you on the 8th of March and all employees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for defending your interests in Russia. Our question is as follows. Is there, in your opinion, excessive euphoria from the arrival of President Trump and his statements? But euphoria is meant both in the world and in Russia. In the common people, it is even called Trumpomny. Does this work interfere with the work of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and, accordingly, as a continuation of this issue? Is the possibility being considered that the United States of America thereby wants to distance itself from the conflict in Ukraine, which they themselves have unleashed, and shift the main responsibility for it to Europe? To try to push Russia into European countries that support Ukraine already in a full-scale military conflict.
About euphoria, I would look at this question a little differently. We still have realism. I am talking about the Russian state bodies and representatives of Russia as a state. And the realism is absolute because we have analyzed all these processes before and understand what is happening now. This is one time. As for what you are talking about, maybe it's not so much euphoria, as I would call it a desire or an aspiration that has matured for a very long time to hear some other record, and not a worn-out, old, creaking, rustling, hissing words about slaughter, wars, aggression, and so on. People hear different vocabulary, people hear different words, and they reach out. They want to welcome it. They want to hope that this is the madness that was instilled in them. And this is the monstrous philosophy of destruction that was planted by the American liberal Democrats, that it will pass and go away. I think this is what you mean, and I would characterize this process as follows. I would not use the word euphoria at all. There is nothing wrong with people perceiving the changed rhetoric like this. This suggests that people are just fine with human reactions, that people respond to it. Another thing is that it is absolutely necessary. Look, the first point is to maintain realism.
Yes, yes. And here is the second part of the questions.
It's for her. I answered it for the first time.
But the question there is in terms of what to push Russia and Europe into a full-scale military conflict now. Here is this opportunity, respectively.
So you look at Western Europe itself. You look at Western Europe itself. Right now there is no pressure from the United States of America. Yes, neither shouts, nor any of their threats. The United States of America is talking about other things. Well, look at the official statements. And, as a matter of fact, unofficial statements. Everyone is saying that let's think about how we can get out of this situation. And the successors of the ideas of the American liberal dictatorships here, they were placed in Europe before that, in the form of Ursula von der Leyen and others there. So they continue their aggressive course. The fact that they apparently have the task of setting Europe on fire, no one even has any questions here. They say it themselves. Yesterday's statement by Macron, these endless statements by supposedly high representatives on foreign policy are exclusively of such an aggressive nature. It is literally at this moment that we are publishing a detailed comment by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a statement by the Foreign Ministry regarding yesterday's speech by Macron. Look, there is also an answer to your question there. Thanks. Let's move on. Is Tavria with us?
Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. With you. Join the congratulations on the International Women's Day. And I would like to thank you separately for the opportunity to participate in the briefing. This is the first experience for the Kherson region, and a very big step for us. The question is also mainly devoted to the Kherson region. We will soon celebrate the anniversary of the reunification of Crimea with Russia. Hence the question, how does the Foreign Ministry assess the dynamics of international recognition of the Russian status of Crimea over the past years? And what diplomatic efforts are being made to ensure international recognition of the Russian status of the Kherson region, taking into account the experience of Crimea?
As you know, in our daily work, our department pays the most serious attention to consolidating the consciousness in the world community of the fact of the irreversibility of the legitimacy of the reunification of Crimea with the Russian Federation, recognizing the realities with an emphasis on respect for the freedom and political choice of the Crimeans. In the format of bilateral interstate interaction on various international platforms, we consistently promote our line. As for the practice of recent years, it convincingly confirms that, despite all the efforts of the collective West to isolate Crimea as part of Russia, the interest of foreign business, socio-political circles, in the development of cooperation is only growing. Visible results of the comprehensive development of the peninsula, ensuring the rights of Crimeans. It seems to me that the unity of the whole country, now the whole together with the Crimea, many foreign guests were able to appreciate firsthand. More and more international political, business, and cultural forums are taking place in the cities of Crimea. The past year has been characterized by noticeable progress in establishing cooperation between Crimea and the countries of the Middle East, Asia-Pacific, Latin America, and Africa. The world majority accepts the prevailing realities, even if it is not always open yet, even without any declarations. But everyone already understands everything, and I do not exclude that it will continue to gain momentum. I mean, it's going to gain momentum anyway. I mean, it's only going to get worse. And as for the second part of the question, of course, it is wrong to focus attention only on the Kherson region. And I understand that you have your own interest. Our diplomats consistently defend the interests of the Russian state as a whole, without isolating any subject of the Federation. At the same time, its own work is carried out with each subject of the Federation, taking into account the specifics. We believe that the international community will inevitably come to accept the Russian status of the republics of Donbass, the regions of Novorossiya. The situation on the ground will also play a great role here. And as for the experience of Crimea, we believe it is infallible at this stage to use it to the full, primarily in terms of accelerated recovery and further development of new Russian entities, including in spite of the sanctions of our opponents.
Thank you. More if we can hope.
Yes, of course.
Is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs planning to organize press tours for foreign journalists to the Kherson region, maybe in the Zaporozhye Donbass region, so that they can see the situation with their own eyes, and tell objectively in their media what is happening, how Novorossiya and Donbass are developing?
You know, we have press tours all over the country. There are specifics of the regions where martial law has been imposed. Accordingly, journalists come there. Another thing is that we do not announce it in advance for security reasons, but work is underway.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, come again. Is the messenger of the Caucasus with us?
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We join in congratulating you on the upcoming International Ukrainian Day. Our question. On Tuesday, a monument to Haidar Aliyev was laid by Sergei Sobyanin in Moscow. How does the Foreign Ministry assess the significance of this cultural project for Russian-Azerbaijani relations?
As you know, our country preserves the memory and treats this bright, extraordinary, talented person and statesman with great warmth and respect, including our common country at a certain stage. You remember, probably, in the 23rd year in Moscow and in other Russian cities, commemorative events were held on the occasion of the centenary of his birth and the upcoming installation of the monument. Now it was only laid in the foundation, so to speak, well, you can say a symbolic stone, right? The monument will only be installed. It will become an important cultural and humanitarian event for our countries, for our two countries. Therefore, this is not the only project, by the way. There will be more. I hope only they will also develop.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Greater Asia. Is it with us? Yes. Hello, Maria Vladimirovna. We have two questions today. Russian-Chinese relations and China's economic development have already been touched upon. Our question concerns the sessions of the CPC and the SNP of the 14th Convocation, which are currently taking place in China. How will this major political event affect the current domestic political situation in Beijing, and how, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry, does it affect bilateral Russian-Chinese relations? You know, this is still an event in China's domestic political life. Of course, it has state significance, but within a sovereign independent state. We will not comment on it in detail. It seems to me that this is the prerogative of our Chinese colleagues. We look forward to strengthening the coordination of the foreign policy steps of the two countries in the international arena and intensifying joint work to protect the principles of a fair, democratic international order based on international law and the formation of an open and indivisible security system in Eurasia. And we, of course, wish the members of the CCNPSC and deputies in the SNP effective and fruitful work. Thank you very much. And the second question. In recent years, relations between Russia and Myanmar have been qualitatively strengthened, and the current visit by the Prime Minister of Myanmar is being held at a very high level. In addition, two consulates general are now being opened in the Russian Federation. And against this background, I would like to hear your opinion on what main strategic tasks allow us to solve our bilateral relations with Myanmar, including in the context of ensuring the stability of the entire Asia-Pacific region. As you know, a lot was said yesterday during the high-level contacts. I will allow myself to answer your question very concisely in this regard, because a lot of materials have been officially published. We see good prospects for expanding trade and economic cooperation, cultural and humanitarian ties, and count on the effective implementation of major joint infrastructure projects in Myanmar, the development of cooperation in industry, agriculture, energy, including construction in this country, has a low-power nuclear power plant. We are working closely with this country on the issues of the ASEAN Dialogue Partnership from last year. For a 3-year period, she took over the functions of coordinator. We see with what energy, with what enthusiasm, NPIDU started to perform these tasks. And, of course, we will continue to work together to strengthen the unity and the central role of the ASEAN 10 in regional affairs, as well as the formation of an architecture of equal and indivisible security in Eurasia. Dear colleagues, I understand that not everyone who was going to be in touch today is in touch, but we will definitely respond point by point if you were unable to connect. So, we are saying goodbye to you today, and I want, of course, to congratulate everyone on the upcoming holiday, the 8th of March. Congratulations, of course, first of all to all women. But why not also remember that this is our common holiday with men? How would we celebrate it without them? Happy New Year!